Tears in a courtroom carry weight. When a victim's family breaks down, everyone understands why. But when the person sitting at the defense table starts to cry, the one who was charged, tried, and in many of these cases convicted, things get complicated fast. Some of those tears were real. Some came from people who genuinely could not live with what they had done. Some came from people who had been performing grief from the very first moment the bodies were found. And some came from people who wept for themselves, for their freedom, for the life they were about to lose, not for the people they took. Over the next few hours, we are going to go through 20 cases. Killers, shooters, stranglers, parents who turned on their own children, people who called police sobbing while the bodies were still warm, people who broke down in front of juries, in front of judges, in front of cameras pointed at their faces. Each case is different. Each set of tears means something different. Let's get into it. Chris Watts. Chris Watts grew up in Spring Lake, North Carolina. Shanann Rusacek grew up in Aberdeen, about 30 miles away. They met in 2010 through mutual friends and got married on November 3rd, 2012. A few years later they moved to Frederick, Colorado, a town of around 8,700 people, bought a 5-bedroom house at 2,825 Saratoga Trail, and started building what looked like an ordinary life. Chris worked as an operator for Anadarko Petroleum. Shanann sold health and wellness products from home for a company called Livell. Their daughter Bella was born December 17, 2013. Their second daughter Celeste, who everyone called Cece, was born July 17, 2015. Shanann posted constantly on Facebook and Instagram. Videos of the girls baking cookies, birthday parties, Chris walking through the front door and scooping his daughters into his arms. Neighbours called them the perfect family. By the summer of 2018, Shanann was 15 weeks pregnant with a boy they had already named Nico. What was happening inside that house in the weeks before August 2018 looked nothing like the photos Shanann was posting online. In June 2018, while Shanann and the girls flew to North Carolina for a 6-week visit with family, Chris stayed in Colorado and began sleeping with a co-worker named Nicole Kessinger. He told her he was separated and finalizing a divorce. He was not. Shanann texted her friends constantly from North Carolina, saying Chris had gone cold, that he would barely talk, that she could feel the marriage falling apart, but could not work out why. She bought a self-help book called Hold Me Tight and mailed a copy to the house for Chris to read. Investigators later found it in the trash, unread. She flew home from Arizona in the early hours of August 13, 2018, dropped off by Nicole Atkinson at 1:48 in the morning. She walked through her front door, not knowing Chris had already made a decision about what was going to happen next. A few hours after Shanann got home, Chris told her he was no longer in love with her. Shanann told him she knew about the affair. According to Chris in his later confession, she told him he would never see the girls again. He put both hands around her neck and strangled her in their bed. 4-year-old Bella then walked into the room holding her blanket, asking what was wrong with her mum. Chris told her Shanann was not feeling well. Bella stood in the doorway and watched her father wrap her mother in a bedsheet and drag the body down the stairs. She began to cry and asked what was wrong with Mummy. Chris loaded Shanann onto the floorboard of his truck, then went back inside and got both girls. He put them on the back seat, directly above their mother's body, and drove to the Anadarko oil field where he worked. At the oil field, Chris pulled Shanann's body from the truck. Both girls, now fully awake, asked him what he was doing to Mummy. He did not answer. He then took 3-year-old Cece and smothered her with her own blue Yankees blanket in the back seat, while Bella sat beside her and watched in silence. He carried Cece's body to one of the oil storage tanks and pushed it through the hatch at the top. The opening was 8 inches wide. He then walked back to the truck where Bella was waiting. Bella asked him in a soft voice, "Is the same thing going to happen to me as Cece?" According to Chris, he told her yes. He then smothered Bella with the same blanket. Bella fought back. Her last words were, "Daddy, no." He pushed her body into a second tank. He buried Shanann in a shallow grave nearby, then drove back home, showered, and went to work. Nicole Atkinson grew worried when Shanann did not respond to texts that afternoon. She went to the house, knocked, got no answer, and called the police. When officers arrived, Chris was cooperative and calm. Shanann's car was in the garage. Her purse, keys, phone and wedding ring were all inside the house. Her lupus medication was in the purse. None of it had been touched. Investigators noted that Bella and Celeste's car seats were still in Shanann's car. Chris told reporters outside the house that he had no idea where his family was. He stood on camera and said, "When I came home and walked in the house, nothing, vanished, nothing was here." The next day, August 15th, Chris agreed to take a polygraph test. He failed. Investigators pressed him. He confessed. He then led police to the oil field and marked the locations of the bodies on a photograph. Chris was charged with 5 counts of first-degree murder, 3 counts of tampering with a body, and 1 count of unlawful termination of a pregnancy. On November 6, 2018, he pleaded guilty to all charges in exchange for the death penalty being taken off the table. Shanann's parents had asked prosecutors not to seek the death penalty. They did not want to put the family through years of trial. At sentencing on November 19, 2018, Shanann's father Frank stood before the court and addressed Chris directly. He said he had loved him like a son. Chris was sentenced to 5 life terms without the possibility of parole, 3 to be served consecutively. He is currently held at Dodge Correctional Institution in Waupun, Wisconsin, after being transferred out of Colorado for his own safety. In February 2019, investigators traveled to Wisconsin for a full recorded confession. Chris wept during that interview, sniffling as he described each step of the morning of August 13th. He cried hardest when he reached the moment he returned to the truck for Bella. He told investigators that every time he closes his eyes, he hears her last 2 words. He said that if he had been thinking, none of it would have happened. He keeps photos of Shanann, Bella and Cece in his cell. He told investigators he reads to the girls every night. Bella was 4 years old, Cece was 3, Shanann was 34. Nico never got a name on a birth certificate. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The next case involves a man whose tears were so extreme during his trial that the judge had to stop the entire proceedings, and the question his behaviour raised in that courtroom still has not been answered cleanly. Oscar Pistorius. Oscar Pistorius was born on November 22, 1986, in Johannesburg, South Africa. He had both legs amputated below the knee when he was 11 months old, because he was born without fibular bones. He grew up playing rugby, water polo and wrestling, refusing to treat his missing limbs as a limitation. He took up running at 17 after a rugby knee injury and became one of the fastest sprinters in the world on carbon fibre prosthetic blades. South Africans called him the Blade Runner. In 2012, he made history as the first double amputee to compete against able-bodied athletes at the Olympic Games in London. He was 26 years old, at the peak of his fame, when he met Reeva Steenkamp in November 2012. Reeva was 29. She had grown up in Port Elizabeth, earned a law degree from what is now Nelson Mandela Metropolitan University in 2005, and worked as a model and paralegal. She was active in speaking out about violence against women and had been scheduled to give a speech at a girls' school on the morning of February 14, 2013. She and Oscar had been together for 3 months when they went to bed at his home in the Silverwoods country estate in Pretoria on the night of February 13th. She had wrapped a Valentine's Day gift for him. The night before she died, she posted on social media, "I woke up in a happy, safe home this morning. Not everyone did." In the early hours of February 14th, Oscar says he got up to move fans from the balcony, heard a sound from the bathroom, assumed an intruder had come through a window, grabbed his 9mm pistol from under the bed, and fired 4 shots through the locked toilet door. 3 of those bullets hit Reeva. 1 struck her in the head. The prosecution argued the couple had been in a loud argument for more than an hour before the shots were fired. Neighbours testified they heard a woman screaming in terror before the gunshots, and that after the last shot, the screaming stopped. Reeva's phone was found on the bathroom floor. She was fully clothed. 3 weeks before she died, she had texted Oscar, "I'm scared of you sometimes, and how you snap at me." Oscar broke the door down with a cricket bat, carried Reeva downstairs, and called neighbours and emergency services. First responders described him as beside himself, screaming and sobbing. He told investigators later, "I sat over Reeva and I cried. She wasn't breathing. trial began on March 3, 2014, at the High Court in Pretoria. South Africa does not use juries. Judge Thokozile Masipa presided alone, assisted by 2 assessors. The entire trial was broadcast live on audio, and parts were televised, the first time that had happened in South Africa. From the very first day, Oscar wept. When the pathologist described Reeva's wounds in detail, Oscar sobbed and vomited into a bucket that had been provided to him at the defence table. The proceedings were paused. When prosecution witnesses testified about the screams they heard coming from the house, Oscar buried his face in his hands. On April 8, 2014, when he took the stand and began to describe the moment he realised Reeva was behind the door, he erupted in what reporters described as anguished howls and heaving sobs. His body shook. He slumped in his seat. His brother and sister crossed the courtroom to reach him. Judge Masipa adjourned the proceedings to give him time to compose himself, then ended the day entirely. Prosecutor Gerrie Nel spent 5 days in cross-examination, hammering Oscar with questions, and throughout all of it, Oscar repeatedly broke down in tears, his voice quavering and breaking, while maintaining he had not intended to shoot Reeva. On September 12, 2014, Judge Masipa found Oscar not guilty of murder, but guilty of culpable homicide, which in South Africa is roughly equivalent to manslaughter. She sentenced him to 5 years in prison. The state appealed. In December 2015, the Supreme Court of Appeal overturned that verdict and found him guilty of murder. On July 6, 2016, Masipa resentenced him to 6 years, which the prosecution called too lenient. The state appealed again. In November 2017, the Supreme Court of Appeal described the 6-year sentence as shockingly lenient and increased it to 15 years total. With time already served factored in, Oscar had 13 years and 5 months remaining. He was held at Atteridgeville Correctional Centre in Pretoria, a facility better suited to disabled inmates than the maximum security prison where he was first held. In March 2023, a parole board denied his release, ruling he had not yet completed the minimum required portion of his sentence. A court later found that calculation was wrong. On November 24, 2023, a parole board approved his release. On January 5, 2024, Oscar Pistorius walked out of Atteridgeville Prison after serving nearly 9 years. Authorities moved him quietly in the early morning hours to avoid the media waiting outside. He went to his Uncle Arnold's home in the wealthy Pretoria suburb of Waterkloof. His parole conditions require him to stay within the Waterkloof district unless given permission to leave, abstain from alcohol, attend anger management sessions, complete programs on gender-based violence, and submit to unannounced visits from parole officials. His sentence does not expire until December 2029. Reeva's father, Barry Steenkamp, died in 2023. Her mother, June, said at his release, "There can never be justice if your loved one is never coming back, and no amount of time served will bring Reeva back. We who remain behind are the ones serving a life sentence." Reeva was 29 years old. The gift she wrapped for Valentine's Day was never opened. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The next case involves a man whose tears played out on camera in front of millions of people, and where a judge looked directly at the jury and said every single tear he cried in that courtroom was for himself alone. Scott Peterson. Scott Peterson was born on October 24, 1972, in San Diego, California. He grew up in an affluent household, played piano as a kid, joined the Boy Scouts, and spent most of his free time golfing and fishing. He attended California Polytechnic State University, where he met a student named Lacey Rocha in 1994. They started dating and moved in together. Lacey grew up in Modesto, in California's Central Valley. She was a cheerleader in high school, studied ornamental horticulture at Cal Poly, and by everyone who knew her, description was warm, social, and deeply family-oriented. Her mother described her as someone who devoted enormous energy to being the kind of wife and homemaker she had always wanted to be. Scott and Lacey married in 1997. They ran a sports bar together in San Luis Obispo called The Shack, then sold it and moved to Modesto to be near Lacey's family and start a family of their own. They bought a 3-bedroom house on Covenant Avenue for $177,000. Scott got a job as a fertilizer salesman, earning $5,000 a month. Lacey worked part-time as a substitute teacher. In the spring of 2002, they found out Lacey was pregnant. They planned to name the baby Connor. Her due date was February 10, 2003. In November 2002, 6 weeks before Lacey disappeared, Scott met a massage therapist named Amber Fry. He told her he was single. He was not. They began a relationship. On December 23, 2002, Lacey spoke by phone with her mother Sharon to confirm plans for Christmas Eve dinner the following night. That was the last time Sharon heard her daughter's voice. On the morning of December 24, 2002, Scott told police he left home around 9:30 in the morning to go fishing at the Berkeley Marina, about 90 miles from Modesto, while Lacey was watching a Martha Stewart program and planning to walk their golden retriever Mackenzie. When he returned home that afternoon, he said the house was empty. He called his mother-in-law Sharon to ask if Lacey was with her. Sharon said no. Lacey's stepfather called police that evening to report her missing. Officers arrived at the house and found Lacey's keys, wallet, purse and sunglasses inside. Mackenzie had been found earlier that day wandering the neighbourhood alone, still wearing his leash. Neighbours who combed the streets found no sign of Lacey. One of the first detectives on the scene, John Bueller, later said that Scott did not behave the way a family member typically behaves. He did not fire questions at investigators. He did not show the urgency or desperation Bueller had seen from others in his position. The search for Lacey Peterson became one of the most widely covered missing person cases in American history, with vigils, reward funds, and volunteers flooding Modesto from across the country. Less than a week after Lacey disappeared, Amber Fry called police and told them she had been in a relationship with Scott since November, and that he had presented himself as single. She agreed to record her future phone calls with him. In one of those recorded calls, made on December 31st, 2002, the night of a public candlelight vigil for Lacey in Modesto, Scott told Fry he was in Paris for the holidays. He was in Modesto. Investigators played those recordings for Scott. Before telling Fry that he had been travelling for work, Scott had told her on a call made before Lacey disappeared that he had lost his wife and that this would be his first Christmas without her. On April 13th and 14th, 2003, two bodies washed ashore on the banks of San Francisco Bay, about a mile apart near Richmond, California. The first was a badly decomposed female torso, missing the head, arms, and most of both legs. The second was a fetus, largely intact, still attached to a piece of umbilical cord. DNA tests on April 18th confirmed they were Lacey and Connor Peterson. That same day, police spotted Scott at a golf course in La Jolla, near the Mexican border. He had approximately $15,000 in cash. His hair had been dyed blonde. He had his brother's driver's license on him, along with multiple cell phones. He was arrested on 2 counts of murder. The trial began June 1, 2004 in Redwood City, San Mateo County, having been moved from Modesto due to the scale of local media coverage. The case against Scott was built almost entirely on circumstantial evidence. He had been fishing in the exact stretch of bay where the bodies surfaced. He had made cement anchors that investigators believed were used to weigh Lacey down. He had been having an affair. He had told his mistress he had lost his wife before she was reported missing. The recorded phone calls were played for the jury. Amber Fry testified for 2 days. When forensic pathologist Dr. Brian Peterson took the stand in September 2004, and the courtroom screen filled with autopsy photographs of Lacey's remains and images of baby Connor, 2 female jurors began to cry. Others looked away or closed their eyes. Tears streamed down Scott Peterson's cheeks as the photos were displayed. His chin dropped to his chest. He pressed tissues against his eyes. His attorney received a fresh stack of tissues from a deputy. Lacey's family was not in court that week and had not been in court for several days as the testimony built toward those images. When the verdict was read on November 12, 2004, Scott sat stone-faced and motionless. He did not flinch. His chin lifted slightly as he glanced between the judge and the jurors. Lacey's mother Sharon collapsed forward in her seat, sobbing. Lacey's friends gasped audibly. Scott showed no reaction. He was convicted of first-degree murder in the death of Lacey and second-degree murder in the death of Connor. He was sentenced to death in March 2005. In August 2020, the California Supreme Court vacated the death sentence, finding that the trial judge had made errors during jury selection in the penalty phase, including dismissing jurors who expressed reservations about capital punishment. Prosecutors did not seek the death penalty a second time. On December 8, 2021, Scott was resentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. At that hearing, Lacey's family members addressed him directly. They called him evil, sociopathic, and remorseless. In October 2022, he was transferred from San Quentin to Mule Creek State Prison in Ione, California, about 40 miles southeast of Sacramento. He has maintained his innocence throughout. In January 2024, the Los Angeles Innocence Project took on his case, filing hundreds of pages arguing that critical evidence was suppressed and that the investigation suffered from tunnel vision. In May 2024, a judge approved DNA testing on one item, a piece of duct tape found on Lacey's pants during her autopsy, while rejecting all other testing requests. That testing has not yet produced public results. Lacey was 27 years old. Connor never had a birthday. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The next case on this list involves a man who cried every day for months on live television, in front of cameras outside his house, at press conferences, and eventually in a courtroom, and whose tears, when examined closely, tell a story that the jury and the judge found impossible to separate from his guilt. Ali Abulaban, TikTok star Gin Kid. Ali Abulaban was born in Staten Island, New York. He served in the United States Air Force and was stationed in Okinawa, Japan, where he met Anna, a woman from the Philippines. The two got together while he was deployed, and when Anna became pregnant, they moved to Bristow, Virginia, near Ali's family. They married in 2017. Their daughter was born not long after. By most outward appearances, it looked like a young couple building a life. Anna filmed videos with Ali. She appeared in some of them. Friends described her as warm and loyal. Ali started posting on TikTok under the name Gin Kid in 2018. His most popular videos were impressions, especially his version of Tony Montana, the character Al Pacino played in the 1983 film Scarface. He built close to 1 million followers. He called his videos his baby. He told people he was on the verge of making it as an actor. He said a talent agent was right there in front of him. His cousin Louis later told documentary filmmakers that Gin Kid was an escape for Ali, that Ali wanted to be a different, more famous person entirely. Friends of Anna told a different story about what was happening at home. Anna's best friend of 15 years, Cassie Conroy, described Ali as selfish and controlling. Prosecutors said he was abusive from the beginning of the relationship and that the violence got worse after the couple moved to San Diego in February 2021. Ali later admitted on the stand that he had physically abused Anna. He described rolling on top of her in their bed and punching her. In the months leading up to October 2021, Anna told him she wanted to leave the marriage. Friends said she stayed at other people's houses to avoid him. About a month before the shootings, Ali slept with another woman. Anna, in response, began spending time with a man named Rayburn Cardenas Barron, 29, who lived in nearby National City. In a text message to his cousin around that time, Ali wrote, "I saw Anna with another man. I will end him." Anna asked Ali to move out of their 35th floor apartment in the Spire San Diego high-rise in downtown San Diego's East Village on October 18, 2021. He agreed, but before he left, he secretly made a copy of the apartment keycard. 3 days later, on the morning of October 21st, while Anna was taking their 5-year-old daughter to school, Ali used that copied key to get back into the apartment. He vandalized the unit and threw out some of Anna's belongings. Then he installed an audio monitoring app on his daughter's iPad, which he left inside the apartment. He checked into a nearby hotel and listened. Through the app, Ali heard Anna return and heard her talking and laughing with Rayburn Barron. He picked up a loaded handgun, drove to the Spire, ran from the elevator to the apartment door, and went inside. Security camera footage showed him running down the hallway. Multiple audio recordings captured the sound of gunshots firing approximately 1 second after he entered. He shot Barron 3 times. He then shot Anna in the head. Both were sitting on the couch. He then called his mother and confessed. After that, he drove to his daughter's school, picked her up while still armed, and told her at some point that he had hurt Mummy. Police arrested him 45 minutes later on the freeway, his daughter still in the vehicle. The trial began in May 2024 and lasted nearly a month. Neither side disputed that Ali pulled the trigger. The only question the jury had to decide was whether the killings were planned in advance or done in the heat of the moment. Ali testified for 3 full days, a record for a defendant on the witness stand in that courthouse. He said he snapped. He said he could not stop himself. He said he was in the passenger seat of his own body. Prosecutors pointed to the copied keycard, the monitoring app, the loaded gun he brought with him, and the text message saying he would end any man he found with Anna. On May 29, 2024, the jury deliberated for several hours across 2 days and found Ali guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder. As the verdict was read, Ali sat completely still. When the jury finished filing out of the courtroom, he broke down and sobbed, speaking quietly to his defense attorney. Sentencing took place on September 6, 2024. 7 family members of Anna and Rayburn gave victim impact statements. Anna's sister stood up, faced Ali directly, and screamed at him. She told him that if she had known what Anna had been going through, she would have flown out and taken her and their daughter away from him. 4 bailiffs stood between Ali and the gallery. Before Judge Jeffrey Ferguson gave his ruling, Ali read a handwritten statement. He apologised. He wept while addressing his daughter. He told the judge that being sent to prison for the rest of his life felt like being sent to hell. When Fraser announced the sentence and the courtroom erupted in cheering and applause, Ali turned around in his seat and mockingly began clapping along, then turned back and appeared to mutter something under his breath. Judge Fraser sentenced Ali to 2 consecutive terms of 25 years to life, for a total of 50 years to life, without the possibility of parole. Then he addressed the tears directly. He told the courtroom that he had watched Ali's Scarface videos, and that when Ali walked into that apartment on October 21st, it was as if he had become that character, cold-blooded, without remorse. He said every tear Ali cried in that courtroom was for himself, not for Anna and not for Rayburn. He called Ali a very talented actor. He said the bottom line was simple. Ali Abulaban would die in prison. Anna was 28. Rayburn was 29. Their daughter was 5 years old when her father picked her up from school with a gun in the car, and her mother already gone. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The next case involves a man who cried in front of cameras for weeks while his family was missing, then cried again years later in a prison in Wisconsin, and the people who watched both performances are still not sure which version to believe. Nikolas Cruz, Parkland shooter. Nikolas Jacob Cruz was born on September 24, 1998, in Margate, Florida. His birth mother, Brenda Woodard, gave him up for adoption at birth. He and his brother Zachary were taken in by Linda and Roger Cruz, a couple who lived in Broward County, South Florida. Roger died when Nikolas was 5 years old. Linda raised both boys alone after that, and by the time Nikolas reached his teenage years, she was struggling to manage him. Police were called to their home numerous times over the years because of his outbursts and destructive behaviour. Then, on November 1st, 2017, Linda died of pneumonia. She was 68. Nikolas was 19 years old and now completely without parents, 3 months before the worst day of anyone's life in Parkland, Florida. The problems had started long before his mother died. Teachers flagged him in preschool. Psychiatrists diagnosed him with ADHD and oppositional defiant disorder as a child. He was transferred between schools 6 times in 3 years because no one knew what to do with him. He brought bullets to school. He posted pictures of weapons online. He talked openly about wanting to shoot up a school. In September 2016, a peer counsellor reported to the school resource officer that Cruz had attempted to take his own life and was talking about buying a gun. 3 people at Stoneman Douglas, a sheriff's deputy and 2 school counsellors, recommended he be committed for a mental health evaluation under Florida's Baker Act. A mental institution reviewed the case and declined. Investigators from Florida's Department of Children and Families looked into him after he posted videos of himself cutting his own arms on Snapchat. They concluded he was at low risk of harming himself or others. In September 2017, someone using the name Nikolas Cruz left a comment on a YouTube video that read, "I'm going to be a professional school shooter." A user reported it to the FBI. Agents could not confirm the identity of the person who posted it and closed the inquiry. A month before the shooting, the FBI received another tip that Cruz owned guns, wanted to kill people, and might carry out a school shooting. That tip was also never investigated. In February 2017, at age 18, Cruz walked into a gun shop in Coral Springs and legally purchased a Smith & Wesson AR-15 style rifle. He passed the background check. He had no felony record, no domestic violence convictions, and no disqualifying mental health adjudications, because every institution that had ever flagged him had stopped short of the one step that would have put his name in the system. He had been planning what he was going to do for years. A prosecution psychiatrist later testified that Cruz told him he had been researching mass shootings since middle school, starting with the 1999 Columbine attack, studying what those killers did and where they made mistakes so he could shape his own plan. He recorded videos of himself in the weeks leading up to February 14, 2018, describing exactly what he was going to do and stating he hoped to kill at least 20 people. He chose Valentine's Day deliberately. He told a psychologist later that he picked that date because no one loved him and he wanted to ruin the holiday for everyone. On February 14, 2018, Cruz ordered an Uber and was dropped off at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland at 2:19 in the afternoon, 20 minutes before the school day ended. He was carrying a duffel bag and a backpack. Inside were an AR-15 style rifle, more than 300 rounds of ammunition, and smoke grenades. A staff member on campus spotted him arriving and radioed a colleague that Cruz was walking purposefully toward Building 12. Within 60 seconds, that colleague heard gunshots and called a code red. Cruz had entered the east stairwell of the 3-story building, pulled his rifle from its case, and opened fire the moment he stepped into the first-floor hallway. Less than 2 minutes later, 11 people were dead and 13 more were wounded. He pulled a fire alarm to draw more students into the corridors. He moved through the building, firing into classrooms, going back to shoot victims who were already down. Prosecutor Mike Satz later described him stalking the hallways for 7 minutes, hunting his victims, returning to the wounded to finish them off. One 14-year-old girl was shot 4 times. He came back and pressed the gun against her chest before pulling the trigger again. After 7 minutes, Cruz dropped his rifle, blended into the crowd of students fleeing the building, and walked off campus. He stopped at a Walmart, then a Subway, then a McDonald's. A Coral Springs police officer spotted him walking on a residential street about 80 minutes after the first shot was fired and arrested him without incident. He confessed. 17 people were dead. 14 were students. Alyssa Al-Hadef, 14. Martin Duque Anguiano, 14. Jaime Guttenberg, 14. Cara Loughran, 14. Gina Montalto, 14. Elena Petty, 14. Alex Schachter, 14. Luke Hoyer, 15. Peter Wang, 15. Carmen Schentrup, 16. Nicholas Dworet, 17. Joaquin Oliver, 17. Helena Ramsey, 17. And Meadow Pollock, 18. 3 adults were also killed. Geography teacher and cross-country coach Scott Beagle, 35. Assistant football coach Aaron Feiss, 37. And athletic director Chris Hickson, 49. 17 more people were wounded. It remains the deadliest mass shooting at a high school in United States history. Cruz was charged with 17 counts of first-degree premeditated murder and 17 counts of attempted murder. He initially pleaded not guilty. Prosecutors announced they would seek the death penalty. The case sat in the courts for years, delayed in part by the COVID-19 pandemic. Then, on October 20th, 2021, Cruz changed his plea. He stood in a Broward County courtroom and pleaded guilty to all 34 counts. He made a brief statement asking the families to decide his fate. He said he believed it was their decision, not the jury's, to determine whether he lived or died. He said he was sorry. Families in the courtroom wept. Some turned away. Some stared straight at him. Because he had pleaded guilty, the trial moved directly to the sentencing phase, where prosecutors spent months arguing for death and the defense argued for life, presenting evidence that his birth mother had drunk alcohol throughout her pregnancy and that experts had determined he suffered permanent brain damage as a result. A prosecution psychiatrist countered that Cruz was capable of controlling his behavior and simply chose not to, diagnosing him with antisocial personality disorder. The penalty phase ran from July to October 2022 and became one of the most extensive sentencing trials in Florida history. Jurors were taken to the still untouched crime scene at Building 12, blood-stained and bullet-pocked years after the shooting. They watched security footage of the attack. They saw autopsy photos. They heard from survivors, from teachers, from the parents of children who never came home. On October 13, 2022, the jury returned its recommendation. All 12 jurors agreed Cruz was eligible for the death penalty, but they deadlocked on whether to impose it. 3 jurors voted against execution. Under Florida law at the time, a death sentence required a unanimous verdict. It could not be given. The jury recommended life without parole. Many families were devastated and furious. Megan Petty, whose 14-year-old sister Elena was among those killed, said Cruz had escaped punishment because a minority of jurors had been given the power to overturn a majority decision. She called him a remorseless monster who deserved no mercy. On November 2, 2022, Judge Elizabeth Scherer formally sentenced Nikolas Cruz to life in prison without the possibility of parole. 17 consecutive life sentences for the murders, plus additional consecutive life sentences for each count of attempted murder. Under Florida's Son of Sam law, he cannot financially benefit from his crimes in any way. Before the sentence was announced, families were given 2 days to speak directly to Cruz for the first time, something Florida law had not permitted during the trial itself. For hours, they stood a few meters away from him and said what they had been waiting years to say. Lori Alhadeff, whose daughter Alyssa was 14 when she was killed, told Cruz she hoped the pain of what he had done burned and traumatized him every day for the rest of his life. Teacher Stacy Lipple, who was wounded in the shooting, told him she had no comfort except knowing that his life in prison would be filled with horror and fear. Survivor Samantha Fuentes, who had been in JROTC with Cruz and walked the same hallways, stood and told him she was angry about his sentence. But unlike him, she said, she would never take her anger out on others because she was stronger than he was. Cruz sat through it all in a red prison jumpsuit, staring at the speakers, showing little emotion across the 2 days of statements. He is currently housed in the Florida Department of Corrections. The state legislature, partly in direct response to this case, changed Florida law after the sentencing so that a death sentence no longer requires a unanimous jury. That law was signed by Governor Ron DeSantis. At least 2 survivors of the Parkland shooting have since died by suicide. The building where the shooting took place, Building 12, remains sealed and untouched. A new building was constructed in its place. The families of the 17 victims continue to live with what February 14, 2018 took from them, in a community that has never fully stopped grieving. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The tears Cruz shed at his guilty plea and the apology he gave to families that day raised a question that followed this case through every hearing and every verdict. When someone has spent years planning to destroy as many lives as possible, what exactly are they sorry for? That question hangs over the next case too, where a man broke down so completely in the middle of his own sentencing that the proceedings had to be paused. But the people who knew him best said they never once saw a single tear that was real. Ethan Crumbley. Ethan Robert Crumbley was born in Atlantic Beach, Florida, to parents Jennifer and James Crumbley. The family moved several times during his childhood, eventually settling in the Lake Orion area of Michigan. A former neighbor later told the Detroit Free Press that in 2014 and 2015, Jennifer and James frequently left their young son home alone without a phone while they went to bars downtown. The neighbor became worried enough to file an anonymous complaint with Michigan's Child Protective Services. By early 2021, when Ethan was 14, things inside the family had deteriorated badly. He sent his mother text messages saying he felt like someone was in the house with him, describing paranoia that came and went. A week after those messages, he told her he thought he had seen a demon He later told a friend in text messages that he had asked his parents for mental health help and that his father had refused, telling him to take some pills and suck it up. According to those same messages, Jennifer had laughed at the idea that her son had mental health problems, suggesting instead that he was just using drugs. In early November 2021, Ethan's only friend moved away. Shortly after that, the family dog died. By the end of that month, according to prosecutors, he was in a deep depression. On November 26, 2021, Black Friday, James Crumbley took his 15-year-old son to an Oxford gun store and purchased a 9mm Sig Sauer SP2022 pistol. A store employee confirmed that Ethan was present for the purchase. The form James signed that day stated explicitly that buying a gun for someone else was illegal. The same day, Ethan posted a photo of the gun on social media with the caption, "Just got my new beauty today." The following day, Jennifer took her son to a gun range where they fired the weapon together. She posted about it on Instagram, describing it as a mum and son day, testing out his new Christmas present, and adding that it was her first time shooting a 9mm. The gun was stored at home in an unlocked drawer in the parents' bedroom. 2 days before the shooting, a teacher at Oxford High School saw Ethan searching for ammunition on his phone during class and reported it to school officials. The school left Jennifer Crumbley a voicemail and sent a follow-up email. Neither was answered. Jennifer later exchanged text messages with her son about the incident and told him she was not mad, adding that he had to learn not to get caught. The morning of November 30th, 2021, a teacher found a note on Ethan's desk that stopped her cold. It showed a drawing of a gun pointing at the words, "The thoughts won't stop, help me." Beside it was a drawing of a bullet with the words, "Blood everywhere," written above it. Between the gun and the bullet was a figure that appeared to have been shot twice and was bleeding. Below that figure was a drawing of a laughing emoji. The note also contained the phrases, "My life is useless," and "The world is dead." The teacher photographed it immediately. School officials called both parents in for a meeting that morning. Ethan was brought to the counsellor's office along with his backpack. By the time officials reviewed the note again, several of the most alarming phrases and images had been scratched out. The parents were asked to take their son home. They refused, saying it would be an inconvenience. Ethan was sent back to class. The gun was still in his backpack. Just before 12:51 in the afternoon, surveillance cameras inside Oxford High School showed Ethan entering a bathroom with his backpack. About a minute later, he walked back out without the backpack and with the Sig Sauer in his hand. He opened fire in the hallway as hundreds of students were changing between classes. He moved through the corridor at a deliberate, measured pace, shooting into classrooms and targeting anyone who had not managed to get away. Staff and students barricaded classroom doors and covered windows. Teachers called out over the intercom that there was an active shooter. Due to the fast response from staff, Crumbley was unable to enter any classroom. He fired into them through doorways and walls. He shot Justin Schilling, 17, at point-blank range after ordering him to his knees. He shot Hannah St. Juliana, 14, and then came back and shot her a second time while she was already down. Within 6 minutes, 4 students were dead and 7 more were wounded, including a teacher. Ethan Crumbley then put the gun on the ground, sat down, and waited calmly for police to arrive. He was in custody within 5 minutes of the first 911 call. When news spread that there was an active shooter at the school, Jennifer Crumbley texted her son, "Ethan, don't do it. It was already over." At 1:37 that afternoon, James Crumbley called 911 to report that a gun was missing from his house and that he believed his son might be the one shooting at Oxford High. The 4 students who were killed were Hannah St. Juliana, 14, Tate Meir, 16, Madison Baldwin, 17, and Justin Schilling, 17. 6 other students and a teacher were wounded. Ethan was charged as an adult with 24 counts, including terrorism causing death, 4 counts of first-degree murder, and multiple counts of assault with intent to murder. He pleaded guilty to all 24 counts in October 2022. His parents, James and Jennifer Crumbley, were each charged with 4 counts of involuntary manslaughter for failing to secure the gun. They initially fled before their arraignment and were found hiding in a Detroit building, leading to a US Marshals manhunt. They were tried separately and both convicted. On April 9, 2024, They were each sentenced to 10 to 15 years in prison, with parole eligibility after 10 years. The first time in American history that parents of a school shooter were convicted and sentenced for their child's crimes. Because Ethan was 15 at the time of the shooting, Michigan law required a special hearing before a judge could sentence him to life without parole. That hearing ran through the summer of 2023. Evidence presented included Ethan's journal entries in which he wrote that his parents had ignored his pleas for help and that he was going to shoot up the school using the gun they had just bought him. Prosecutors also played audio recordings he made the night before the shooting, in which he said he was going to be the next school shooter and that he was going to have so much fun. The judge heard evidence that Crumbley had felt something between good and pleasurable when he tortured a baby bird, and while in jail awaiting sentencing, he bypassed security measures on a tablet to access graphic, violent content online. On September 29, 2023, Judge Kwame Rowe ruled that life without parole was appropriate, finding that Crumbley's obsession with violence had not diminished and that his crimes bore none of the hallmarks of impulsive youth. On December 8, 2023, Ethan Crumbley, now 17, stood before Judge Rowe for formal sentencing. 29 people gave statements that day: parents, siblings, survivors, teachers. Buck Meyer, father of Tate, described the moment his wife learned their son was dead, putting her head in her hands and crying out, "Not my baby boy." The father of Hannah Street Juliana said he was a shell of the person he used to be. Madison Baldwin's mother refused to say Ethan's name, calling him trash and waste, and said she wanted him to suffer a lifetime of guilt behind bars because death would be too easy. When it was Ethan's turn to speak, he stood and told the court he was a really bad person who had done terrible things that no one should ever do. He said he had hurt many people and was not denying it. He said whatever sentence the victims wanted, he asked for it to be imposed on him. He said he wanted the families to feel safe and to never have to worry again. He said he was sorry. Then he looked down and did not react at all when the sentence was read. Judge Rowe sentenced him to life in prison without parole. He was the first minor in Michigan to receive that sentence in over a decade. The judge said Crumbley had walked through that school, picking and choosing who was going to die, called it an execution, called it torture, and said he had done it all for notoriety, because he wanted to go down as the biggest school shooter in Michigan history. He is currently held in the Michigan Department of Corrections. His appeal to withdraw his guilty plea was dismissed by the Michigan Court of Appeals in May 2025. He will die in prison. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The words Ethan Crumbley said in that courtroom, that he was a really bad person who had done terrible things, left the families unmoved, and for good reason. His own journals had told a different story. Not a boy overwhelmed by pain, but one who was excited for what was coming. What follows is another case where a man who stood in front of a courtroom and performed grief was later exposed by the people who watched him most closely. People who said what they saw in his eyes had nothing to do with the people he had taken from the world. Alex Murdaugh. Richard Alexander Murdaugh, known to everyone as Alex, was born into one of the most powerful legal families in South Carolina's history. For nearly a century, 3 generations of Murdaugh men had served as the elected chief prosecutor for the 14th Judicial Circuit, a 5-county stretch of the state's low country that locals had long called Murdaugh Country. Alex's great-grandfather held the post first, followed by his grandfather, then his father. Alex did not follow them into that exact role, but became a personal injury attorney at the family's Hampton County law firm, where the Murdaugh name meant near instant trust. He married Maggie, had 2 sons, Buster and Paul, and the family eventually moved to Moselle, a 1,772-acre hunting estate in Islandton, South Carolina, with dog kennels, dove fields, duck ponds, and a custom-built house. On the surface, it was the life of a man who had inherited a kingdom and kept it intact. Underneath, it had been rotting for years. From at least 2005, Alex was stealing money from clients at his own firm, redirecting settlement funds meant for injured, grieving, and vulnerable people into accounts he controlled. He stole from a state trooper hurt on the job, from a client who became a quadriplegic, from a trust set up for children whose parents were killed in a crash. When his longtime housekeeper Gloria Satterfield died in 2018 after a fall on the steps of Moselle, Alex stood at her funeral with his arm around her son and promised he would take care of the family. Then he stole the entire $4 million insurance payout meant for her boys. He was burning through money to fund a crushing opioid addiction, taking more than 2,000 milligrams of oxycodone a day by his own later admission. By 2021, prosecutors believe he had stolen over $12 million across more than 24 victims, and his world was beginning to fall apart. A wrongful death lawsuit filed after a 2019 boat crash involving his son Paul, which had killed 19-year-old Mallory Beach, was forcing legal discovery that threatened to expose everything. On the morning of June 7, 2021, partners at the law firm confronted Alex about $792,000 in missing legal fees. That same evening, Alex called Maggie on the phone and asked her to come to Moselle. She texted a friend afterward, saying her husband sounded fishy and was up to something. She drove to the estate. Paul, 22, was already there, staying in a cabin on the property. That night, at 8:44 p.m, Paul took a short video on his phone at the dog kennels, capturing a family dog and the voices of people around him. Alex's voice was clearly audible in the background. Prosecutors later determined that Maggie and Paul were shot dead near those kennels between 8:49 and 9:02 p.m. Maggie, 52, was shot multiple times with a rifle. Paul was shot multiple times with a shotgun, 2 different weapons. Both murdered in the same few minutes, in the dark, on their own property. At 10:06 p.m, Alex called 911 from his phone, telling the dispatcher he had come home to find his wife and son shot dead. He told the first investigators on scene that he had never gone to the kennels that night, that he had taken a nap inside while Maggie and Paul walked out on their own. Paul's phone had been locked. Investigators spent months trying to break into it, eventually realising the passcode was simply his birthday, 041499. When they accessed it, the kennel video destroyed everything Alex had told them. A close family friend who had spoken to Paul on the phone that night confirmed to investigators he was nearly certain he had heard Alex's voice in the background. Alex had been there. He had lied. The case moved slowly at first, in part because the Murdaugh name meant something to virtually everyone in the local legal system. But in July 2022, Alex was indicted for 2 counts of murder and 2 counts of possession of a weapon during a violent crime. He pleaded not guilty. His trial began January 25, 2023, at the Colleton County Courthouse in Walterboro. It ran 6 weeks and drew national attention. 75 witnesses testified. Jurors were taken to Moselle to walk the property. Against the advice of his lawyers, Alex chose to take the stand. He spent 2 days testifying. He acknowledged, for the first time publicly, that he had been at the kennels that night. His explanation was that paranoia from his opioid addiction had caused him to lie. He appeared to cry repeatedly on the stand, breaking down at moments when speaking about Maggie and Paul. The jury watched carefully. Juror Craig Moyer later told ABC's Good Morning America that what he saw was not crying. He said Murdaugh never shed a single tear, that all he did was blow snot. 3 other jurors who spoke to NBC's Today Show after the verdict said the same thing. One juror, Gwen Jenneret, said he turned the emotion on and off. Another, James McDowell, said they were able to read right through it, adding that Murdaugh was a lawyer who knew how to perform emotion. The jury deliberated for under 3 hours. On March 2, 2023, they found Alex Murdaugh guilty on all 4 counts. When the verdict was read, he stood still and showed no reaction. Judge Clifton Newman sentenced him the following morning, March 3, 2023, to 2 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. Newman noted during sentencing that a portrait of Alex's grandfather that had hung in the very same courthouse had to be removed before the trial to ensure fairness. Newman told Alex that he had not just betrayed his family, he had betrayed a legacy of legal service that the community had trusted for generations. Alex stood up after the sentence was given and said he was innocent and that he would never have hurt Maggie or Paul. Those were his last public words on the murders. But the legal proceedings were not over. In November 2023, Alex pleaded guilty to 22 state financial crimes and was sentenced to 27 years in prison by the same Judge Newman to run concurrently. At that sentencing, victims lined up to confront him. His childhood friend Jordan Jinks, who had trusted Alex with an injury settlement and been financially ruined when Alex stole every penny, stood before him and asked why. He told Alex the money he stole he would have just given him. He asked why.
Bro. He was crying, not for himself, but for everyone else Alex had destroyed.
Alex cried too at this hearing. Photographs from the courtroom showed tears on his face. Newman noted the contrast from what the jury had seen during the murder trial and told Alex he had one of the emptiest souls he had encountered in 23 years on the bench. In April 2024, a federal judge sentenced Alex to an additional 40 years for related federal financial crimes to run concurrently. He is currently serving 2 consecutive life sentences plus those additional terms at a South Carolina state prison. His appeals in the murder case remain ongoing. As of mid-2025, the South Carolina Supreme Court was still reviewing the appeal. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The difference between the 2 times Alex Murdaugh cried, once in front of a jury that decided his tears were manufactured, once in a financial crimes sentencing where photographs showed real ones, is something that stayed with everyone who watched this case. When the people he robbed were looking him in the eye, something different appeared on his face. What follows is the case of a man who made the same calculation as Murdaugh, but without the courtroom experience to pull it off. A killer whose crying fooled some people in the room, but whose own recorded words told a completely different story. Paul Michael Stefani. Paul Michael Stefani was born on September 8, 1944, in Austin, Minnesota, the second of 10 children in a devoutly Catholic family. His mother remarried when he was 3 years old. His stepfather was known to be physically abusive, beating the children and at times throwing them down the stairs. Stefani grew up, moved to the Minneapolis-St. Paul area, held various jobs, and married a woman named Beverly Leader. They had a daughter together before divorcing. In 1977, he was fired from his job as a janitor at Malmberg Manufacturing Company in St. Paul. What made that detail significant was something no one would understand until much later. The first victim's body would be found near that same building. By December 31, 1980, the violence that had been building inside Paul Stefani reached another person for the first time. On New Year's Eve 1980, 20-year-old college student Karen Potak was walking in St. Paul after leaving a party when Stefani attacked her. He beat her with a tire iron so savagely that her skull was fractured and her brain was exposed. He left her naked in the snow and called police at 3 in the morning in a high-pitched, sobbing voice to report where she could be found. Officers rushed to the scene and found her alive, barely. She survived, but the brain damage she suffered was permanent and she retained no memory of the attack. Investigators had a weeping anonymous caller on tape and a victim who could tell them nothing. The case went cold. On June 3, 1981, a group of teenagers walking through a field in St. Paul near Interstate 35E came across the body of a young woman. She had been stabbed 61 times with an ice pick, mostly in the chest and stomach, and strangled with a shoelace. She was 18-year-old Kimberly Compton, who had just moved to Minneapolis from Pepin, Wisconsin, that same day looking for work. Within hours of police discovering the body, the same weeping voice called from a payphone near a bus depot. He said, "God damn, will you find me? I just stabbed somebody with an ice pick. I can't stop myself. I keep killing somebody." 2 days later he called again, crying, saying he was sorry and promising to turn himself in. He never did. On June 6th, he called to correct details in news reports about the case. On June 11th, in a barely coherent, whimpering voice, he cried, "I'm sorry for what I did to Compton." Police traced several calls to payphones but always arrived to find no one there. On July 21st, 1982, a 33-year-old schoolteacher named Kathleen Greening was found dead in her bathtub in Burnsville, just outside St. Paul. Her death was initially ruled an accidental drowning. There was no phone call after this one. No one suspected Stefani. No one would connect him to Greening's death for 15 years. On August 6, 1982, a paperboy on his early morning route found a woman's body on the banks of the Mississippi River in Minneapolis. She was 40-year-old nurse Barbara Simons. She had been stabbed more than 100 times. The night before, she had been at the Hexagon Bar in Minneapolis, where she met Stefani and accepted his offer of a ride home. She told a waitress before leaving, "I hope this guy's okay because I just need a ride home." Shortly after her body was found, the weeping voice called police again. He said, "Please don't talk, just listen. I'm sorry I killed that girl. I stabbed her 40 times. Kimberly Compton was the first one over in St. Paul. I don't know what is the matter with me. I'm sick." He also said, "If somebody dies with a red shirt on, it's me. I've killed more people. I'll never make it to heaven." Police now had a description of the man Simons had left the bar with. They ran it against their files and identified Paul Stefani as a suspect. A surveillance team was placed outside his apartment. On August 21, 1982, investigators briefly lost track of Stefani. During those hours, he picked up 19-year-old Denise Williams in Minneapolis, drove her to his St. Paul apartment, and then offered to drive her back. Instead of returning to the city, he took back roads into a dark suburban area. When he turned onto a dead-end street, he pulled out a screwdriver and stabbed Williams 15 times. She fought back with a glass bottle she found on the car floor, striking him hard in the head and opening wounds on his face. A neighbour heard her screaming, came outside, and confronted Stefani, who fled. Williams survived. Stefani drove home, realised he was bleeding badly from the head wounds Williams had inflicted, and called for medical help. When emergency services received the call, dispatchers recognised the voice immediately. It was the same high-pitched, sobbing voice from years of recorded calls. Paul Stefani was taken into custody that night. He was charged with the murder of Barbara Simons and the attempted murder of Denise Williams. During the trial, his ex-wife, his sister, and a woman who had lived with him all testified that they recognised his voice on the recorded calls. The problem was that the extreme distortion caused by his hysterical crying made a conclusive voice identification impossible under the legal standard at the time. He was convicted of both counts and sentenced to 58 years in prison, 40 years for the Simons murder and 18 for the attack on Williams. He continued to deny the other crimes. Over a decade passed. In December 1997, Stefani was diagnosed with skin cancer while in prison at Oak Park Heights in Minnesota. Doctors gave him less than a year to live. He decided he wanted to confess before he died. He contacted law enforcement from his cell and told them everything. The attack on Karen Potak, the murder of Kimberly Compton, the murder of Barbara Simons, and the attack on Denise Williams. Then he mentioned something else. A woman he had drowned in a bathtub. He could not remember her name or any identifying details. Investigators searched records for freshwater drownings in the relevant time frame and found one case that matched. Kathleen Greening, the schoolteacher found in her bathtub in 1982. When they pressed Stefani for details about the apartment, he described it accurately. They also found the name Paul S., along with a phone number in Greening's address book. He had not been a suspect in her case for 15 years because he had never made a phone call after that one. In exchange for his confessions, he asked investigators for one thing: a photograph of his mother's headstone. He later wrote a letter to a journalist who had covered his crimes, asking for the home addresses of his victims' families so he could send them flowers and apologise. The journalist did not respond. Paul Michael Stefani died in Oak Park Heights Prison on June 12, 1998, from skin cancer. He was 53 years old. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The calls Stefani made after each crime are unlike anything else in the history of documented criminal behaviour. A man so unable to stop himself that he picked up the phone and begged the same people hunting him to find him and end it. What comes next is a case where the crying came not from someone pleading to be caught, but from a man in a courtroom who had calculated every word, and whose own recorded voice said the very opposite of everything his tears were meant to suggest. James Parker Robert Tulloch and James Parker grew up in Chelsea, Vermont, a small rural town of around 1,200 people, about 30 miles from Dartmouth College in New Hampshire. Tulloch was 17 and Parker was 16. Both had been considered bright, popular kids at Chelsea High School. Tulloch had been student council president. Parker was in the school band and drama club. From the outside, There was nothing to distinguish them from any other teenagers in a quiet New England town. But by the summer of 2000, something had shifted. Tulloch had grown contemptuous of ordinary life, school, college, careers, and Parker followed his lead. The two began talking about how they were smarter than everyone around them, how the normal path was a waste of a life, and how they wanted something different. They settled on a plan to travel to Australia and live on their own terms. The problem was money. Rather than earn it, they decided to take it. And rather than leave witnesses, they decided to kill whoever they robbed. Through the second half of 2000, the pair made at least 4 attempts to enter homes in Vermont and New Hampshire. They cut phone lines to one house in Vermont, Vermont in July. They knocked on doors claiming their car had broken down or that they were students conducting a survey. Each time, either no one answered or they were turned away. They had purchased SOG tactical knives, the kind used by military special forces, and carried them on every attempt. The plan each time was the same: get inside, force the occupants to hand over ATM card information and PIN numbers, then kill them so there would be no witnesses. None of the attempts succeeded. On January 27, 2001, they drove to Hanover, New Hampshire, and knocked on the first house they found near the Dartmouth campus. No one was home. They moved to the next house. Half Zantop was 62 years old and taught earth science at Dartmouth. His wife Suzanne was 55, held a PhD from Harvard, and chaired the German Studies department. Both had been born in Germany and had been teaching at Dartmouth since the mid-1970s. They had 2 daughters, Veronica and Mariana. That evening, Suzanne was preparing food for a dinner party she was hosting at their home in Etna, New Hampshire. When Tulloch and Parker knocked on the door claiming to be students conducting an environmental survey, Half let them in. He sat with them and began answering their questions. At some point, he told them they should have come more prepared, which angered Tulloch. When Half turned away to get a business card from his wallet to give to the boys, Tulloch pulled out his knife and stabbed him repeatedly in the chest and face. Suzanne came in from the kitchen and tried to stop it. Parker stabbed her. Tulloch also stabbed her. Both Half and Suzanne Zantop were killed in their own living room. The boys took $340 from Half's wallet and left. A friend arrived that evening for the dinner party and found the bodies. Police came and searched the house. In the chaos of fleeing, Tulloch and Parker had left behind the sheaths to their SOG knives. Those sheaths were a rare model. Investigators traced the sales records and identified Parker as a buyer. Police went to Chelsea to question both boys. They were fingerprinted. After the officers left, Tulloch told Parker they needed to run. The two abandoned Parker's silver Audi at a truck stop in Sturbridge, Massachusetts, and started hitchhiking west. They told a truck driver they were heading to California. That driver announced their destination over his CB radio. An undercover police officer posing as another driver offered them a ride. 3 weeks after the murders, they were arrested at a truck stop in Spiceland, Indiana, and brought back to New Hampshire. Both were charged as adults given the severity of the crime. Parker agreed to a plea deal. He would testify against Tulloch in exchange for pleading guilty to second-degree murder. Tulloch, facing the evidence, abandoned a planned insanity defense and pleaded guilty to first-degree murder in April 2002. His sentence was mandatory, life in prison without parole. Parker's sentencing came separately. When he stood before the court, Parker wept. He broke down and apologized. Tulloch, by direct contrast, stood silent and showed zero emotion. He refused to even look at Veronica Zantop as she read her victim impact statement aloud. Veronica told the court that her father's name, translated from German, meant help, and that his openness and generosity towards strangers was the very thing that had allowed 2 boys with knives through his front door. Parker was sentenced to 25 years to life, with the possibility of parole after 16 years. Parker served more than 2 decades. In prison, he earned a high school diploma, a bachelor's degree, and a master's degree. He created artwork displayed inside the facility, helped develop education guides for other inmates, and maintained a clean disciplinary record. In 2018, he applied for early release, but withdrew the petition in 2019 after the Zantop daughters objected and said it would cause them further pain. He did not push it again until he was eligible for formal parole. In April 2024, at age 39, Parker appeared before the New Hampshire Parole Board.
He told them, "I think it's unimaginably horrible. I know there's not an amount of time or things that I can do to change it or alleviate any pain that I've caused." The board granted parole. He was released in June 2024 with a permanent no-contact order with the Zantop family and a requirement to continue mental health treatment for the rest of his life under supervision. Tulloch remains in prison. In 2014, the New Hampshire Supreme Court ordered his sentence reviewed following a US Supreme Court ruling that mandatory life sentences for juvenile offenders were unconstitutional. As of September 2024, that review hearing had still not concluded. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Two men walked into that house. One wept in court and has since spent decades trying to become someone different. The other said nothing, felt nothing, and showed nothing. A contrast so stark that the people in that courtroom never forgot it. What follows next is a case where the person crying in the courtroom had not just planned the crime, but was so calculating about the entire thing that investigators found a paper trail going back years before the first body was ever found. Stephen Dean Gordon. Stephen Dean Gordon was born on February 3, 1969, in Linwood, California. His family moved to Norwalk shortly after his birth, and he grew up in poverty. He was small in stature, considered unpopular at school, and occasionally bullied, which left him with a hair-trigger temper and a pattern of responding to perceived humiliation with aggression. He graduated from Santa Fe High School in 1988 and did not pursue further education. In 1992, his sister accused him of sexually abusing her daughter. He pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 15 months in prison. Later, he withdrew the plea and claimed that his sister had fabricated the allegation, but the sentence remained in place and he served the time. In 2001, he abducted his ex-wife at gunpoint using a stun device, restrained her, and drove her across state lines to Nevada. In 2002, he was convicted on 2 counts of kidnapping and sentenced to 10 years in prison. After his release, he was placed on GPS monitoring as a registered offender and was barred from associating with other offenders. He ignored both conditions almost immediately. Frank Cano was born in Compton in 1986 into a working-class Catholic family. In 2006, he committed a serious offence involving his 9-year-old niece. He later pleaded guilty to charges related to harming a minor in 2007, received a 2-year sentence, and was released on parole in October 2009 with a GPS ankle monitor. He moved into a motel in Anaheim with his parents helping cover the rent. The two men met not long after his release and quickly became inseparable. Gordon had been sleeping in his Toyota 4Runner. He invited Cano to sleep there too. They eventually moved to an auto repair shop in Anaheim, where Gordon had found work, and they lived together in the building. They were not supposed to be in contact with each other at all. Their text messages, later obtained by investigators, showed how casually they talked about finding women. A detective who read through them described it as being like ordering food, with the men sending messages back and forth, asking each other what they felt like that day, using language that made their intentions clear. They referred to potential victims as cats. They noted when a cat realized it was not getting away, it would fight. They hunted on nearly a daily basis. Beginning in October 2013, Gordon would drive while Cano hid in the back seat. When a woman got into the car, Cano would emerge and hold her at gunpoint while Gordon drove to the auto shop. There, both men would assault the women before they were killed. Kiana Jackson, 20, from Las Vegas, was last seen on October 6, 2013, in Costa Mesa. Josephine Vargas, 34, a mother described by her family as someone they called Giggles because she always made people laugh, vanished on October 24, 2013. Martha Anaya, 28, another mother, disappeared on November 12, 2013. Gordon later admitted that when he and Cano realized Jackson had noticed their ankle monitors during the attack, they decided they had no choice but to kill her. All three women's bodies were never found. Police and prosecutors believe their remains ended up in a landfill in Brea, California, but given how much time passed, they made no attempt to recover them. On March 13th or 14th, 2014,
A worker at a recycling facility in Anaheim was sorting through trash on a conveyor belt when he noticed what looked like a human foot. The body was wrapped in a blue tarp. It was 21-year-old Jare Nicole Estep, who had arrived in California from Oklahoma City just days earlier. Gordon later said he had not wanted to kill her because she was beautiful, but when she refused to stay quiet, he and Cano made the decision together. DNA from both men was found on her body. A fingerprint on a caulking tube in the trash near her pointed investigators to the industrial area where Gordon worked. Detectives then ran a search of registered sex offenders with GPS monitoring who had been in the area at each of the 4 victims' last known locations. Both Gordon and Cano matched every single location, every single time, even the dumpster where the women's bodies had been disposed of. They were arrested on April 11, 2014. Gordon confessed during a 13-hour interview with Anaheim police detective Julissa Trapp, who gave him a blanket and shared 2 meals with him across that time. He gave 2 versions of events, one initially placing more blame on Cano, then a second version where he acknowledged they had planned it together. He said they raped the women before deciding to kill them to prevent identification. He also admitted to a 5th murder, a woman whose name he could not remember, who he said he had drowned in a bathtub. That victim was potentially identified as 19-year-old Sable Pickett, who had disappeared from Compton in February 2014, but neither man was ever charged in connection with her. Gordon chose to represent himself at trial. He did not deny what he had done. He told jurors that if you kill 4 people in cold blood the way he did, you deserve to die. The jury convicted him on all counts on December 15, 2016, and agreed on the death penalty after a single day of deliberations. Gordon praised them for the decision and asked for no leniency. At his sentencing on February 3, 2017, his 48th birthday, 6 family members gave victim impact statements. Martha Anaya's mother spoke through a translator and said her daughter had been a responsible mother who left behind 2 children who asked about her every day. Jare Estep's mother told the court that Gordon had taken the light right out of her life. Kiana Jackson's family said they had no forgiveness for him and could see nothing more fitting than death. As the family spoke, Gordon wiped away tears. When it was his turn, he said he was sorry for everything, but that those were hollow words compared to what those women went through. He said he was truly sorry, and that he knew it did not mean anything. Jare Estep's mother told reporters afterward that she was not moved by it. Gordon was sentenced to death and transferred to San Quentin State Prison. Frank Cano pleaded guilty on December 15, 2022, and was sentenced to life without parole. Cano gave his own statement in court that day, saying the 4 women were loved and that he had destroyed lives instead of helping. The 3 families who were present accepted that outcome. The bodies of Kiana Jackson, Josephine Vargas, and Martha Anaya have never been found. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The next case involves a man who waited until he was already behind bars to confess, not because police had found him out, but because he said the people he had killed did not deserve to die, and he was the only one left who could say so. David Edward Moust. David Edward Moust was born on April 5, 1954, in Connellsville, Pennsylvania. His parents divorced when he was 7. His mother was described by social workers as psychotic and mentally unstable. She had been hospitalized in a psychiatric facility herself. When David was 9, she took him to a mental institution in Chicago and left him there. He later told a reporter she used it to get rid of him because she did not want him. Staff at the institution noted they never actually observed the violent behavior she reported as the reason for bringing him. What they did observe was a child described as appealing and sensitive, but deeply hurt by abandonment. He stayed there until 1967. He was institutionalized again at Logansport State Hospital in Indiana at age 13. He eventually joined the US Army, completed training, and was stationed in Frankfurt, Germany in 1972, where he served as a cook. In 1974, 13-year-old James McClister, the son of American expatriates living in Germany, was killed. Moust was court-martialed and convicted of involuntary manslaughter and larceny. He claimed the boy's death was an accident involving a moped he had stolen.
He was sentenced to 4 years at Fort Leavenworth. He asked not to be paroled. He was released in 1977 anyway. Back in Chicago in 1979, he stabbed a friend while the man slept in his apartment. He went to trial for attempted murder, lied on the stand, and was found not guilty. In 1981, he decided he wanted to find and kill a man who had molested him as a child inside the institution. He could not find him. Instead, he encountered 15-year-old Donald Jones and drowned him in a quarry in Elgin, Illinois. That same year, in Texas, he stabbed a 14-year-old boy and received a 5-year sentence. While locked up in Texas, he was extradited to Illinois for the Jones murder. In Illinois, he was initially found unfit to stand trial and held in mental health units inside the prison system for years. In 1994, he finally pleaded guilty to the murder of Donald Jones and was sentenced to 35 years. The Cook County prosecutor sent a fact sheet to the Illinois Department of Corrections that stated he was most likely the most dangerous person they would ever house and urged that he never be released. Moust himself wrote a 5-page letter to the department asking to remain incarcerated. He wrote, "I believe that any person who harms or murders another person should never be free to live in society again. I used up all my chances to be free. On my release date, take me to a penitentiary so I can live out the rest of my life there." Nobody listened. In June 1999, after serving 17 years, he was released on probation. He moved to Oak Park, Illinois, then to Hammond, Indiana in 2002. In Hammond, Moust rented an apartment at 4933 Ash Avenue in North Hammond. He began befriending teenage boys in the neighborhood. Nicholas James, 19, was killed on May 2, 2003. James Regagni, 16, was killed on September 10, 2003. Michael Dennis Jr., 13, was killed on September 11, 2003, the day after his friend Regagni. Regagni and Dennis had been reported missing by their families on September 10th. In December 2003, after investigators began looking into the disappearances, they dug up Moust's basement floor. All 3 boys were found wrapped in plastic and encased in concrete beneath it. Moust was arrested on December 10, 2003. During a 5.5-hour interview at the Lake County Jail shortly after his arrest, Moust detailed all 3 murders and 2 others. He confessed without being pushed. In November 2005, he pleaded guilty to all 3 Indiana murders, avoiding the death penalty. 3 consecutive life terms without parole. He asked to be kept in permanent isolation. His defense attorney said Moust had no reason to hold anything back. He was an individual who wanted to die, and the only thing stopping him from confessing to additional murders was whether doing so might somehow shorten his path to that end. At sentencing, family members wept in the gallery. In a statement made after the proceedings, Moust said of all 5 victims, "They were good, non-violent, innocent young people who did not deserve to die. None of them did anything wrong. They had nothing he wanted except to be his friend, and they took nothing from him. But he still killed them for no reason." Those words came after sentencing, not during it. In the courtroom itself, he gave only one-word responses. The families of James McClister's mother, Christina Harding, said through tears that she had been waiting more than 30 years just to hear him admit what he had done to her son, and that she finally had peace of mind. Don Smith, stepfather of James Regagni, called him a predator on society. On January 19, 2006, the day Moust was told he would be transferred to the Indiana Department of Corrections to begin serving his sentence, he fashioned a noose from materials in his cell and hanged himself. He was taken to a hospital and died the following day, January 20, 2006. He was 51. Jail workers found a suicide note in which he confessed to all 5 killings and apologised to the victims' families. The note also said that his mother had hated him his whole life and that he wished she would come and take him home. She never claimed his body. His attorney paid for his cremation. His ashes were scattered at an undisclosed location. Michael Dennis Sr., father of the youngest victim, said it was the best birthday present he had ever received. The case led Indiana to create a violent offender registry, enacted in July 2006, requiring convicted murderers to register with local law enforcement upon release. Before we move on,
If you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Coming up next is a case where the crying came not from behind bars or inside a courtroom, but in front of cameras and reporters on the street. A man whose tearful performances were so convincing that the public believed him for years, right up until the moment federal investigators proved every word he had said was a lie. Aaron Hernandez. Aaron Joseph Hernandez was born on November 6, 1989, in Bristol, Connecticut. He grew up in a working-class household, where his father was known to be a tough and physically abusive disciplinarian. His father died from complications following hernia surgery when Aaron was 16. People who knew the family said that loss hit him harder than anything else in his childhood, and that he never fully recovered from it. He was already a standout athlete by then, one of the most recruited tight ends in the country. He enrolled at the University of Florida, played under head coach Urban Meyer, and was part of the Gators team that won the 2009 BCS National Championship alongside Tim Tebow. He was also known in Gainesville for running with the wrong people, getting into fights, and making decisions off the field that alarmed those around him. Despite those concerns, the New England Patriots selected him in the 4th round of the 2010 NFL Draft when he was 20 years old. In New England, he became one half of one of the most dangerous tight end combinations in the league, alongside Rob Gronkowski. He played in Super Bowl 46 against the New York Giants. In August 2012, the Patriots rewarded him with a 5-year, $40 million contract extension. He bought a $1.3 million mansion in North Attleboro, Massachusetts. He and his longtime fiancée, Shayana Jenkins, had a daughter named Avielle in 2012. From the outside, he had everything. Behind it, he was using marijuana heavily, carrying weapons, and maintaining friendships with people from his past who were connected to serious violence. On July 16, 2012, 2 men named Daniel D'Abreu, 29, and Safiro Furtado, 28, were shot dead in a drive-by shooting in Boston's South End. Prosecutors would later allege that Hernandez had opened fire on their car at a red light because D'Abreu had accidentally bumped into him and spilled a drink on him at a nightclub earlier that night. Hernandez was not charged for those killings until 2014, and they would become the second major trial of his life. In February 2013, he travelled to Florida with a friend named Alexander Bradley. After a night out at a strip club, he allegedly shot Bradley in the face during a dispute, causing Bradley to lose his right eye. Bradley did not cooperate with police at the time. Odin Lloyd, 27, was a semi-professional linebacker for the Boston Bandits who was dating Shania Jenkins, the younger sister of Aaron's fiancée. The 2 men had met at a family gathering in 2012 and appeared to be friends. Prosecutors believed that by June 2013, something had shifted, that Lloyd had learned something about Hernandez that Hernandez could not afford to have shared. The exact motive was never definitively established at trial. In the early morning hours of June 17, 2013, Hernandez picked up Lloyd in a rented silver Nissan Altima, along with 2 associates named Ernest Wallace and Carlos Ortiz. The last text Lloyd sent to his sister said he was with the NFL. At around 3:30 a.m., Lloyd was shot 6 times at an industrial park in North Attleboro, less than a mile from Hernandez's home. His body was found by a jogger later that morning. Police searched Hernandez's house the following day. In the days after the murder, Hernandez smashed his home surveillance system and hired a cleaning crew. His cell phone was destroyed. Shell casings matching those at the murder scene were found in the rental car. Chewing gum purchased by Hernandez was found stuck to a shell casing at the scene, and the DNA matched him. Shoe impressions at the scene matched shoes Hernandez was wearing in surveillance footage from that same night. He was arrested on June 26, 2013. 90 minutes later, the New England Patriots released him from the team. His trial for Lloyd's murder began on January 29, 2015, in Fall River, Massachusetts. After more than 36 hours of deliberation over 7 days, the jury returned a guilty verdict on April 15, 2015, first-degree murder. Under Massachusetts law, that carried a mandatory sentence of life in prison without parole. He was taken to Sousa Baranowski Correctional Center in Lancaster. While inside, he was also charged with the 2012 double murder of D'Abreu and Furtado. That separate trial began in February 2017.
On April 14, 2017, the jury in the double murder case acquitted him on all murder counts after 37 hours of deliberation across 5.5 days. He was convicted only of unlawful possession of a firearm. When the not guilty verdict was read aloud in the Boston courtroom, Hernandez wept quietly. He embraced his attorneys. He looked back at his fiancée and nodded. Relatives of D'Abreu and Furtado sobbed so loudly they had to be helped from the room. His defense attorney called him a beautiful young man and said he had been wrongly accused. Hernandez was still serving life without parole for Lloyd's murder, so the acquittal changed nothing about his immediate future. 5 days later, on April 19, 2017, at 3:05 a.m, correctional officers found Hernandez hanging from a bedsheet tied to his cell window at Sousa Baranovsky. He had jammed the door shut with cardboard to slow entry. He was transported to UMass Memorial Hospital in Leominster, where he was pronounced dead at 4:07 a.m. He was 27 years old. 3 handwritten notes were found beside a Bible open to John 3:16. The words John 3:16 had been written on his forehead in red ink. His murder conviction for Lloyd was initially vacated because he died before his appeals were exhausted, but the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court reinstated it on March 13, 2019. After death, researchers at Boston University studied his brain and found stage 3 chronic traumatic encephalopathy, the most severe case they had ever seen in a person his age from their entire database of 468 brains examined. Dr. Anne McKee, who led the research, said they had never seen damage of that severity, except in individuals at least 46 years old at time of death. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The next case involves a man who did not cry after a verdict, or after sentencing, or after being caught, but rather in a courtroom while being confronted with his own recorded words, proving exactly what kind of person he truly was. Michael Hernandez. Michael Hernandez was born on February 2, 1990, in the suburbs of Miami, Florida. He grew up in Palmetto Bay, a quiet residential area just south of the city. His parents were described by family members as attentive and supportive. His father ran a business, and his mother worked as an occupational therapist. By all outward appearances, the household was stable. Michael was the youngest of 2 children, and at school, he performed well academically. He attended Southwood Middle School, a public school on Southwest 81st Avenue in Palmetto Bay. He was known to teachers and students as a bright kid. What nobody around him knew was that he had been spending time online studying the crimes of serial killers, and that the obsession had taken deep root. At some point before he turned 14, he decided he wanted to become one. He kept a detailed handwritten journal. Inside it were the names of people he planned to hurt, along with notes that included instructions to himself. Make sure they are dead. Make sure no one else is in the bathroom. If so, kill them. His own sister's name was in the journal. So was a classmate named Andre Martin. So was his friend, a boy named Jaime Rodrigo Goff, also 14 years old. Jaime was a straight-A student who played the violin. The two were close. In the days before the murder, Michael tried to lure both Andre and Jaime into a bathroom stall together. Andre grew uneasy when Michael kept pushing for both of them to go in at the same time. The bell rang. They went to class. The next day, Michael tried again, this time with Jaime alone. On the morning of February 3, 2004, before the first class of the day, Michael told Jaime he had something to show him and led him into a handicapped bathroom stall at Southwood Middle School. Once inside, he pulled out a knife and stabbed Jaime more than 40 times. He then slit his throat. After it was over, Michael hid the knife in a secret compartment built into his backpack and walked to his first class. He sat down. Jaime's body was found in the stall not long after. When a teacher noticed blood on Michael's clothing, he was pulled aside. Police were called. Michael was arrested. He was 14 years old. In his confession, when asked why he had done it, he had no answer. Michael was charged as an adult with first-degree murder and the attempted murder of Andre Martin. His defense team argued at trial that he had been experiencing a psychotic episode and was not criminally responsible for what he did. The prosecution used his journal, his detailed planning over a period of 2 to 3 months, and the steps he took to conceal the crime as evidence of clear, deliberate intent. The jury rejected the insanity defense. In 2008, Michael was found guilty of first-degree murder. Miami-Dade Circuit Judge John Schlesinger sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole, the mandatory sentence under Florida law at the time for first-degree murder. In 2012, the United States Supreme Court ruled that juveniles could not automatically receive mandatory life sentences without the chance of parole. That decision was later made retroactive to older cases, which meant Michael was entitled to a new sentencing hearing. That hearing took place in February 2016. Michael, now 26, took the stand. He choked up and told the court that what he did to Jamie was senseless, and that Jamie had always been a good friend to him. He apologized to Jamie's parents, Jorge and Maria Goff, who were seated in the courtroom. He also apologized to Andre Martin, who was present and testified that day. Martin, now a Miami-Dade police officer, said he did not accept the apology and did not find it genuine. Jorge Goff looked at Michael's face and said he did not believe him at all. The prosecutor who handled the resentencing, Miami-Dade Assistant State Attorney Gail Levine, had been listening to Michael's recorded jail calls. What she played in that courtroom ended any discussion about whether his tears were real. In one call with a female pen pal, Michael had joked that he was not sure he could cry when the time came in court, and that he might have to stab himself to get the tears going. The court also heard him speaking to fellow inmates about serial killers and genocidal historical figures, praising violent imagery and referring to the sentencing judge as a piece of something unprintable. 2 homemade knives and a pipe had been found in his prison cell. Levine told him directly, "As you sit here today, you cry on cue, that is what you do." She also said, "You didn't think I was smart enough to listen to your calls." Judge Schlesinger imposed life in prison a second time, finding that Michael's potential for rehabilitation was low. In May 2018, the 3rd District Court of Appeal upheld that sentence. Michael Hernandez died on April 29, 2021, at Columbia Correctional Institution, roughly 50 miles west of Jacksonville. He was 31 years old. An autopsy confirmed he died of cardiac dysrhythmia, a heart rhythm disorder connected to morbid obesity. He was 5 feet 10 inches tall and weighed 285 pounds at the time of death. No foul play was suspected. His trial attorney, Richard Rosenbaum, said he had spoken to Michael just 2 days before he died, and that he had seemed positive and hopeful. Jamie's parents said the news was a shock. They had not expected it. Jorge Goff said the family had not wanted to see Michael die. Maria Goff said she still thinks about her son every single day. Jamie would have been 32 years old. Southwood Middle School marks the first week of February each year with a Peace Week in his memory. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The next case involves a woman who gave tearful television interviews and performed grief so convincingly for the cameras that it took federal investigators, not local police, to finally see through it and bring her to justice. Jennifer Faith. Jamie Faith was 49 years old, an American Airlines technology director in Dallas, Texas. He and his wife Jennifer lived in the Oak Cliff neighborhood, a close-knit residential area on the south side of the city. They had been married 15 years. They had a daughter named Amber. By all accounts, their neighbors knew them as a friendly, ordinary couple. Jamie was described by friends as kind, caring, and someone who would do anything for anyone. The day before he died, October 8, 2020, he and Jennifer celebrated the 15th anniversary of their first date. The following morning, October 9, 2020, at just after 7 a.m., Jamie and Jennifer left their home on Waverly Drive for their regular dog walk with their dog, Maggie. 1 minute into that walk, a masked gunman who had been lying in wait at a neighbour's property stepped out and opened fire. Jamie was shot 7 times, 3 times in the head, 3 times in the chest, and once in the groin. He died on the street in front of his own house. The gunman then grabbed Jennifer, forced her to the ground, and used duct tape to bind her wrists before fleeing in a black Nissan Titan pickup truck with a distinctive white Texas Rangers T decal on the back window. The attack was captured on the Faith's own front door security camera. Within hours, Jennifer was on the phone with the press and local police, weeping and pleading for help. Neighbours mobilised immediately. More than 50 families signed up to deliver food. A community GoFundMe page titled Support Jennifer Faith was set up by a neighbour and raised over $60,000 in the weeks after the murder. 2 months later, Jennifer gave a television interview on Dallas ABC affiliate WFAA, breaking down in tears and telling viewers that the truck was critical, that somebody had to know who it belonged to. She described her husband as the backbone of their family. She said she was not supposed to be a widow at 48. People believed her completely. Investigators, however, had already started pulling at threads. When Jennifer gave police access to her phone early in the investigation, they found a text she had sent to a friend in April 2020, 6 months before the murder, describing a full-blown emotional affair. The man she named was Darren Ruben Lopez, 49, her high school boyfriend and prom date from Arizona. Lopez was a retired Army Green Beret who had served 6 combat deployments in Iraq and Afghanistan, earning the Purple Heart and the Bronze Star. He had also suffered a traumatic brain injury from a roadside bomb, which left him with cognitive and physical disabilities. He was separated from his wife, had 5 daughters, and was living in Cumberland Furnace, Tennessee. Jennifer and Lopez had reconnected on LinkedIn in March 2020. Within weeks, they were exchanging messages hundreds of times a day. Over the course of 7 months, they sent each other more than 116,000 texts and emails. What Lopez did not know was that many of the messages he believed came from other people were actually Jennifer in disguise. She created a fake Gmail account in her husband's name and used it to send Lopez threatening and abusive emails, written as if Jamie had discovered the affair and was warning Lopez to stay away. She created a second fake account posing as a mutual friend named Rob and used it to tell Lopez that Jamie was burning Jennifer and physically attacking her. The fake abuse photos she sent Lopez were a mix of stock images and old photos from a car accident she had been in years before Jamie. Every claim of abuse was fabricated. Over months of engineered emails, Lopez grew convinced that Jennifer was in serious danger and that Jamie was the threat. Jennifer's response to one of Lopez's messages, written while she was still pretending to be the friend, said she would feel better once Jennifer was out of the house, or someone put a bullet in Jamie's head. On October 8th, Lopez drove from Tennessee to Dallas. He parked near a neighbor's house and waited. After the murder, Jennifer texted Lopez about the T sticker on his truck the same day she gave her emotional television interview, urging the public to find the truck. She told him she woke up in a panic and that he needed to remove the sticker that day. He did it the following morning. She also initiated a claim for roughly $629,000 in life insurance benefits through Jamie's employer and began texting Lopez updates on the status of the payout, with plans for the money to fund a home in Tennessee where they would live together. She used the GoFundMe donations to buy Lopez gifts, pay off 2 credit cards she had given him, and send money to him and his daughters. A TF agents arrested Lopez at his Tennessee home on January 11, 2021. The gun used to kill Jamie was found inside a satchel in his residence. Jamie's blood was on the firearm. Jennifer was charged with obstruction and then, in September 2021, with federal interstate murder for hire, a charge that carries a potential death sentence. She pleaded guilty on February 7, 2022. On June 21, 2022, US District Judge Jane Boyle sentenced her. Prosecutors introduced body cam footage from the morning of the murder in which Jennifer sobbed hysterically while telling police what had happened. They also played surveillance audio of her screaming during the attack. At sentencing, Jennifer wept again. Judge Boyle addressed her directly. She told Jennifer she was not sure why she was crying, called what she had done a complete betrayal, and called her pure evil and disgusting. Jennifer was sentenced to life in federal prison without the possibility of parole. She was also fined $250,000 and ordered to pay $6,500 in restitution to Jamie's family for funeral costs. GoFundMe refunded the $60,000 to all donors. The court also required Jennifer to formally acknowledge on the record that Jamie had never abused her and that every photo and every claim had been a lie. Lopez went to trial in July 2023, was found guilty of murder and was sentenced to 62 years. His appeal was denied in December 2024. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The next case involves a man who spent years sitting in judgment of others as a court judge before he became the one on trial, and whose tears in front of a jury led the presiding judge to accuse him of trying to manipulate the people deciding his fate. Judge Jeffrey Ferguson. Jeffrey M. Ferguson spent decades building a career in the Orange County legal system. He joined the district attorney's office in 1983 and spent over 30 years as a prosecutor, handling narcotics cases and earning awards for his work. In 2015, he became an Orange County Superior Court judge and presided over criminal cases out of the Fullerton courthouse. He was 73 years old in the summer of 2023, still sitting on the bench, still carrying a loaded .40 caliber Glock in an ankle holster, a habit he kept even while hearing cases. His courtroom bailiff later testified that Ferguson regularly drank alcohol at lunch before returning to court. The Orange County District Attorney's Office subsequently launched a review of cases he may have handled while impaired. Ferguson and his wife Cheryl had been married 27 years. They had a son named Philip. The family had been carrying a painful secret for 6 years. Ferguson's older son Kevin had been revealed not to be his biological child, a discovery that prosecutors said had created lasting tension between the couple. The argument that ended Cheryl's life started over something far smaller. On August 3, 2023, Jeffrey, Cheryl and Philip went to El Cholo, a Mexican restaurant in Anaheim Hills. The dispute that day centered on Kevin not having sent a thank you note for money the couple had given him for childcare. During the meal, Jeffrey made a hand gesture at Cheryl shaped like a gun. He later claimed he meant it as a touche gesture, a way of saying she had made a good point. Cheryl was upset enough that she left the restaurant before the others. The argument continued after the family returned to their home at 8500 East Canyon Vista Drive. That evening, Cheryl and Jeffrey were watching the television series Breaking Bad in the living room, with Philip also present. Philip later told police that he heard his mother say something to the effect of, "Why don't you point a real gun at me?" According to Philip's account, which prosecutors called the most reliable version of events, he turned around and saw his father pull out a gun, aim it at his mother, and fire. Cheryl was struck once in the chest. She was 65 years old. Philip tackled his father to wrestle the gun away from him and then performed CPR on his mother. It did not save her. She was pronounced dead at the scene. Within minutes of the shooting, Ferguson texted his court clerk and bailiff, "I just lost it. I just shot my wife. I won't be in tomorrow. I will be in custody. I'm so sorry." He was arrested that night. Anaheim police also recorded audio of Ferguson sitting alone in an interview room at the station, talking to himself. "I killed her." He was released the following afternoon after posting bond. His blood alcohol level was recorded at .13 at the time of a reading taken after the shooting, with a second reading of .25 taken several hours later. He was later suspended from the bench. He rejected a plea deal that would have required prison time. His first trial began in early 2025. Ferguson testified in his own defense, claiming he was removing the gun from his ankle holster to set it on a cluttered coffee table when his injured shoulder caused him to fumble it and it discharged accidentally. During testimony, he grew tearful, recounting how he and Cheryl had met. Presiding Judge Los Angeles Superior Court Judge Eleanor J. Hunter, brought in to avoid any conflict of interest in Orange County, abruptly called a lunch break and warned defense attorneys she would excuse the jury every time Ferguson became emotional on the stand. She had already noted that after the case began drawing media attention, Ferguson had gone on what she called a press tour, appearing on 3 television stations, weeping on camera, and telling interviewers he already felt like he was dead inside. Hunter told the defense directly, he gave the interviews and cried on TV so he could taint the jury pool, and that was clearly the only reason he did it. The first jury deliberated 32 hours and deadlocked 11-1 in favour of conviction. A mistrial was declared in March 2025. 6 weeks later, the retrial began. Hunter opened it with a stern public rebuke over the TV interviews, warning that doing so as a sitting judge violated judicial ethics. During the retrial, Ferguson again grew emotional on the stand, and Hunter again warned him repeatedly not to cry in front of the jury and told him, "It is pretty apparent you are not going to respect my wishes." Before the verdict came back,
Hunter was on the verge of holding Ferguson in contempt after he was found sitting outside the courtroom on a hallway bench near where jurors were walking, talking loudly about the possibility of an acquittal with a bail bondsman. She stated, "I believe Mr. Ferguson is attempting to influence this jury." She was preparing a punishment when the jury returned with its verdict on April 22, 2025. Guilty of second-degree murder with a true finding on a firearm enhancement. Ferguson sat still as the verdict was read. He was then allowed to embrace Philip before being handcuffed. At sentencing on September 17, 2025, Ferguson's voice cracked as he addressed the court. He said there was nothing he could ever say or do to repair the damage to his family, called Cheryl generous-hearted, and said he wished God had taken him instead. Before being led away, he whispered to Philip, "It's okay, be strong." Judge Hunter sentenced him to 15 years to life for the murder, plus 20 years for the firearm enhancement, a total of 35 years to life in prison. She noted that 23 out of 24 jurors across both trials found him guilty. Cheryl's brother Larry Rosen, who believed it was an accident, wept and told the court he was worried about Philip losing both parents. At 74, Ferguson will need to serve the full 35 years before becoming eligible for parole. He is believed to be the first sitting California judge convicted of murder. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The next case centers on two parents who claimed they had no idea what their son was capable of, even as investigators uncovered the text messages, the unlocked gun drawer, and the school notebook that made clear exactly what warnings they had ignored. James and Jennifer Crumbley. The full story of the Oxford High School shooting on November 30, 2021, including the 4 students who lost their lives that day, was covered earlier in this video when we looked at Ethan Crumbley directly. This case focuses on what happened to his parents, the investigation into their actions before the shooting, their separate trials, their convictions, and the moment both of them stood before a courtroom and wept while addressing the families of the children their son had shot dead. James and Jennifer Crumbley had moved to Oxford, Michigan, from Atlantic Beach, Florida. Their son Ethan was 15 years old and struggling in ways both of them later said they did not fully see. Prosecutors argued they had seen enough. Ethan had been sending his mother texts in spring 2021, describing a presence in the house, writing that there was a ghost or a devil, and begging her to respond. Jennifer did not take them seriously. She later told the court the messages were part of an ongoing joke about the house being haunted. A friend of Ethan's testified that Ethan had told his parents about the hallucinations and asked for help, and that his mother had laughed at him. Jennifer was also in the middle of a 6-month extramarital affair at the time, meeting her boyfriend in a Costco parking lot during work hours. Prosecutors said her attention was elsewhere. On November 26, 2021, the Friday after Thanksgiving, James took Ethan to a gun store and purchased a 6-hour 9mm handgun as an early Christmas present. The following day, Jennifer took Ethan to a shooting range. Surveillance footage from that range showed her leaving with the gun case in her hand. She said she gave it to James when he got home from work, and that he was responsible for storing the guns. James kept the firearms in an unlocked drawer in the master bedroom. There was no cable lock, no trigger lock, and no gun safe. The morning of November 29th, a teacher at Oxford High School reported that Ethan had been searching for ammunition on his phone during class. The school called Jennifer. She texted Ethan, "LOL, I'm not mad at you. You have to learn not to get caught." The following morning, November 30th, a teacher found a note on Ethan's desk during math class. The note contained a drawing of a gun pointing at the words, "The thoughts won't stop, help me." Another drawing of a bullet with the phrase, "blood everywhere," a laughing emoji, and the phrases, "My life is useless and the world is dead." The school called both parents in for an emergency meeting with a counsellor. Officials showed them the note and told them to get Ethan immediate help, offering resources for same-day mental health care. Both parents declined to take him home, said they had to return to work, and told the school that if he left, he would walk home alone. Neither parent mentioned the gun they had just bought him. Neither told the counsellors it existed. The school, worried about Ethan's mental state and not wanting him unsupervised, allowed him to stay. He had the gun in his backpack. At 12:51 that afternoon, he opened fire in the hallway.
4 students died, 7 were wounded. 4 days later, on December 4th, 2021, after it became public that charges were being prepared against them, James and Jennifer Crumbley drove to Detroit. Authorities found them inside an art studio in an industrial building and arrested them. Their attorneys said they had not intended to flee. They were charged with 4 counts of involuntary manslaughter each and held in Oakland County Jail. They were given separate trials at their attorneys' requests. Jennifer's trial began January 25, 2024. She testified in her own defense and, in a moment that drew national attention, told the court that she had asked herself whether she would have done anything differently, and that she would not have. She said she was a good mother and an ordinary parent, and that this could happen to any family. The jury deliberated roughly 11 hours across 2 days. On February 6, 2024, Jennifer was found guilty on all 4 counts of involuntary manslaughter. During the trial, she had cried at several points, but showed little visible reaction when the verdict was read. James's trial began March 7, 2024, and focused heavily on how the firearms were stored. He was convicted on all 4 counts on March 14, 2024. He had made profanity-laced threats against prosecutor Karen McDonald on recorded jailhouse phone calls and had raised his middle finger toward a prosecutor during trial. Prosecutors cited this in asking for a sentence above the standard guidelines. On April 9, 2024, James and Jennifer Crumbley were sentenced together at Oakland County Circuit Court in Pontiac, Michigan, before Oakland County Circuit Court Judge Cheryl Matthews. The families of all 4 victims gave statements first. Nicole Beausoleil, the mother of Madison Baldwin, told the Crumbleys directly, "Not only did your son kill my daughter, but you both did as well." Craig Schilling, the father of Justin Schilling, told them the blood of their children was on the Crumbleys' hands too. James spoke and wept, wiping away tears repeatedly. He said he wanted the families to know how truly sorry he was and how devastated he had been when he found out what happened, and that he had cried for them and the loss of their children more times than he could count. He said he wished he had known what was going on. Jennifer also spoke and walked back her trial testimony, saying that with the benefit of hindsight, she would have done things differently. She told the court she would be in her own internal prison for the rest of her life. Judge Matthews sentenced both to 10 to 15 years in prison, the maximum available, with credit for 858 days already served. She said the convictions were not about poor parenting, but about repeatedly ignoring things that would make any reasonable person's hair stand up. James and Jennifer Crumbley are the first parents in United States history to be convicted and sentenced to prison for a mass school shooting carried out by their child. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The next case involves a man who had already been convicted of murdering 1 person and was sitting in prison for it, when investigators started looking more closely at the death of his 3rd wife years earlier and the disappearance of his 4th. Drew Peterson. Drew Walter Peterson was born January 5, 1954. He spent the majority of his adult life as a police sergeant in Bolingbrook, Illinois, a suburb about 30 miles southwest of Chicago. He was charming, confident, and known around the department for his humour. He was also, by the accounts of most women who got close to him, controlling, threatening, and dangerous. He married his first wife, Carol Brown, in 1974 after they met in high school. That marriage ended in 1980 when she discovered he was having an affair. He married his second wife, Victoria Connolly, in 1982. She later told investigators that Peterson had subjected her to physical abuse throughout their decade together, and that he had told her he knew how to kill her and make it look like an accident. That marriage ended in 1992 after she found out he was sleeping with Kathleen Savio, a woman he had met on a blind date. Peterson married Kathleen Savio in May 1992. They had 2 sons together. By 2001, he was already having an affair with Stacey Cales, a girl he had begun seeing when she was 17 years old, while he was still Kathleen's husband. Kathleen filed for divorce in October 2001. The split was bitter. Police were called to her home 18 times between 2002 and 2004 for domestic incidents involving Peterson. Kathleen wrote a letter to the Will County prosecutor during that period, saying Peterson abused her and that she feared for her life. At the time of her death, a court was still deciding how to divide their assets. Kathleen was set to receive part of Peterson's pension. She never got it. On March 1st, 2004, Kathleen Savio was found dead in her dry, empty bathtub at her home in Bolingbrook. She had a large gash in her scalp and extensive bruising across her back, torso and face.
A coroner's jury ruled her death an accidental drowning. One of the jurors on that panel was a police officer who personally knew Peterson and told the other jurors he was a good man who would never hurt his wife. Peterson had divorced Kathleen just months earlier in October 2003. He was already married to Stacey Cales by the time Kathleen's body was found. The case was closed. Peterson and Stacey married on October 18, 2003. He was 49, she was 19. They had 2 children together and lived at 6 Pheasant Chase Court in Bolingbrook, less than a mile from the home he had shared with Kathleen. By 2007, Stacey was telling people she wanted a divorce. She told her pastor, Reverend Neil Shorey, that Peterson had killed Kathleen Savio and made it look like an accident, and that she had given him a false alibi for the night of the killing. She told her sister Cassandra Cales she was scared of him. On October 28, 2007, Stacey Peterson vanished. She was 23 years old and close to finishing a nursing degree at Joliet Junior College. Peterson told police she had called him to say she was leaving him for another man. Her family said she would never have left her children. Witnesses reported seeing Peterson and another man carrying a large barrel away from the house shortly after she disappeared. Stacey has never been found. Her disappearance changed everything about the Kathleen Savio case. Investigators went back to Kathleen's death and ordered her body exhumed. A second autopsy was conducted in November 2007 by Dr. Michael Baden, a former New York City medical examiner. Baden concluded that Kathleen had drowned after a struggle and that her body had been placed in the bathtub. The death was officially reclassified as a homicide in February 2008. Peterson was arrested and charged with her murder on May 7, 2009. He had already retired from the Bolingbrook police force. His trial began in the summer of 2012 in Will County. There was almost no physical evidence. The prosecution's case was built largely on statements Kathleen and Stacey had made to friends, family members, and clergy before they died or disappeared. Illinois had passed a law in 2008 known as Drew's Law, which allowed hearsay testimony to be admitted in cases where the defendant was believed to have caused the witness to be unavailable. Kathleen's pastor, her sister, and Stacey's pastor all testified about what the 2 women had told them. The jury deliberated for nearly 14 hours. On September 6, 2012, Drew Peterson was found guilty of the first-degree murder of Kathleen Savio. He sat stoic and showed no visible reaction as the verdict was read. Outside the courthouse, Kathleen's family wept and people cheered. Peterson's sentencing took place on February 21, 2013. Before Judge Edward Moust handed down the sentence, Kathleen's sisters read victim impact statements. Anne-Marie Savio Doman described the horror and betrayal her sister must have felt in her final moments. Susan Doman said the scar of losing her sister would never leave her. Then Peterson took the stand and delivered a long, rambling statement in which he wept at times and attacked everyone involved in the case: Kathleen's family, the prosecutors, the police, the media, and the courts. He shouted that he did not kill Kathleen. Susan Doman shouted back, "Yes, you did," from the gallery before deputies removed her. Peterson told Will County State's Attorney James Glasgow that all aspects of his life had been destroyed, then looked at him and said, "Never forget my face. Never forget what you have done. I don't deserve this." Judge Moust, noting Peterson showed no remorse, sentenced him to 38 years in prison. Peterson was sent to Menard Correctional Center in Chester, Illinois. Within a month of arriving, another inmate attacked him, hoping to sell his belongings online. From inside prison, Peterson then arranged to have Glasgow killed, offering $10,000 to a fellow inmate who was a member of the Satan's Disciples gang, a man known as Beast, who was actually wearing an FBI wire. The conversations were recorded. Peterson was charged in February 2015, convicted on May 31, 2016, and sentenced in July 2016 to an additional 40 years to be served after completing his murder sentence. With both sentences combined, he will not be eligible for parole until 2081. He is currently held at a state facility outside Illinois, the exact location not publicly disclosed for security reasons. Stacey Peterson has never been found. No one has ever been charged in connection with her disappearance. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The next case involves a mother who shot her own 3 children on a deserted road at night, then stepped in front of television cameras the very next day and performed grief so convincing that the country mourned alongside her, for a while. Diane Downs. Elizabeth Diane Downs was born August 7, 1955 in Phoenix, Arizona. She grew up in a strict household, married her high school boyfriend Steve Downs in 1973, and had 3 children with him: Christy Ann, born in 1974, Cheryl Lynn, born in 1976, and Stephen Daniel, nicknamed Danny, born in 1979. The marriage was troubled from the start. Steve later said Diane showed almost no maternal instincts, that she neglected the children, and that she treated them harshly. The couple divorced in 1980. After the divorce, Diane was working as a postal carrier in Arizona when she began an affair with a married co-worker named Robert Knickerbocker. She became deeply obsessed with him. She wrote to him almost every day. Knickerbocker eventually ended the relationship, telling her plainly that he was not going to leave his wife and that he had no interest in being a father to her children or anyone else's. Diane moved to Springfield, Oregon in April 1983, taking a job with the Postal Service there and bringing her 3 children with her. She had been in Oregon for only about 6 weeks when she shot all 3 of her children on a deserted road at night. On May 19, 1983, shortly before 11 p.m, Diane drove her blood-soaked car up to the emergency entrance at Mackenzie Willamette Hospital in Springfield and screamed that somebody had shot her kids. Christy, 8, and Danny, 3, were alive but gravely wounded. Cheryl, 7, was already dead. Diane had a gunshot wound to her left forearm that was not life-threatening. She told police a bushy-haired stranger had flagged down her car on a rural road, demanded her keys, and opened fire on the children when she refused. She said she threw her keys into the bushes to distract him, got back in the car, and raced to the hospital. Hospital staff and police were uneasy with Diane from the first moments. Her demeanour was described as far too calm for a mother whose child was dead in the back seat. Investigators noticed almost immediately that her story had problems. There was no blood spatter on the driver's side of the car. There was no gunpowder residue where there should have been if the attack had happened the way she described. A witness came forward to report that he had passed Diane's car on the road that night, moving at an estimated 5 to 7 miles per hour, not the high speed she claimed. When investigators asked about firearms, Diane said she did not own a gun. Both Steve Downs and Robert Knickerbocker separately told police she owned a .22 caliber Ruger pistol. Police confirmed she had purchased one in Arizona. They could not find the gun, but found unfired .22 caliber cartridges in her home with extractor markings matching the murder weapon. What police also found was that 4 days after the shooting, when Diane arrived at the hospital to visit her injured children, her first call was to Knickerbocker in Arizona. She appeared completely calm. In the weeks that followed, she began giving media interviews. She was composed, well-dressed, and spoke at length about what a terrible ordeal it had been, for herself. She smiled. She laughed at times. She never expressed sadness about Cheryl's death or worry about Christy and Danny's conditions. At one point, a reporter asked her whether she felt lucky to have received only a minor wound, and she replied that her children were the lucky ones, because she had not been able to tie her shoes for 2 months. She also went with detectives to reenact the crime scene on camera, where she was filmed laughing as she walked through the sequence of events. She never shed a single tear in any public appearance. Diane was arrested on February 28, 1984, 9 months after the shooting. By the time her trial began in May 1984, she was pregnant again, which she stated publicly was because she missed her children so much. The prosecution's key witness was Christy, who had suffered a stroke from blood loss and spent months in physical therapy relearning to speak. When prosecutor Fred Hugie asked Christy on the stand who had shot her, Christy answered, "My mum." Christy described how the car was parked on the side of the road when her mother shot each of the 3 children. The The prosecution's psychiatrist testified that Diane showed no remorse and regarded her children not as people, but as possessions, with any feelings for them extending only to how they reflected on her. On June 17, 1984, Diane was convicted on 1 count of murder for Cheryl's death, 2 counts of attempted murder for Christy and Danny, and 2 counts of criminal assault. Between the verdict and her sentencing, she gave birth to a girl she named Amy Elizabeth. The baby was taken by the state of Oregon 10 days before sentencing and placed for adoption. The girl was later renamed Becky Babcock. Diane was sentenced to life in prison plus 50 years. The judge made plain that he did not intend for her to ever be free again. After the trial concluded, Christy and Danny were adopted by lead prosecutor Fred Hughey and his wife. On July 11, 1987, 3 years into her sentence at the Oregon Women's Correctional Center in Salem, Diane escaped by scaling an 18-foot razor wire fence. She was recaptured 10 days later at a home near the prison, belonging to another inmate's husband, and transferred to a more secure facility. She has been held in California ever since and is currently incarcerated at the California Institution for Women. She has been denied parole in 2008, 2010, 2020, and again in December 2025, with the board scheduling her next hearing for 2031. She has maintained her innocence at every single hearing. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The next case involves a man who set up an elaborate kidnapping hoax, staged tearful television appearances, pleading for his missing wife and sons to come home, all while knowing exactly where their bodies were. Chris Coleman. Chris Coleman was born March 20, 1977, in Chester, Illinois, and grew up in a deeply religious household. His father, Ron Coleman, and mother, Connie Coleman, were both pastors. After high school, Chris enlisted in the Marine Corps, and in May 1997, he met Sherry Ann Weiss at a K-9 training seminar at Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio, Texas. Sherry was also military, and the two dated for about 3 months before marrying. They settled in Columbia, Illinois, in a 2-story home at 2800 Robert Drive, a lakeside community near St. Louis. Friends described them as the perfect couple. They had 2 sons, Garrett, born April 20, 1998, and Gavin, born in 2000. Chris eventually left the Marines and landed a job with Joyce Meyer Ministries, a large Christian organization based in Missouri. He worked his way up to become Joyce Meyer's personal head of security, traveling with her internationally and earning around $100,000 per year. The job came with a strict requirement: divorce was not acceptable. Joyce Meyer later testified that she had not known about what was coming, and that an affair, had she known, would have been grounds for losing the position. In November 2008, Chris began a sexual affair with Tara Lintz, a woman from St. Petersburg, Florida, who had been Sherry's friend since high school. The relationship escalated quickly. Chris and Tara met in Arizona and Hawaii while he was traveling for work. They exchanged explicit text messages, photos, and videos. By early 2009, Tara had given Chris a deadline: leave Sherry by May 4th, and they would marry in 2010. Chris told her the divorce papers were ready, and his wife would be served the next day. Around the same time, a series of threatening emails and letters began arriving, sent to Chris, to Joyce Meyer, and to her son. The messages warned that Chris and his family would be harmed if he did not quit the ministry. A neighbour who happened to be a Columbia police detective, Justin Barlow, installed a security camera at the Coleman's mailbox at Chris's request. Nothing was ever caught on it. Investigators later determined that every single threatening email had been sent from Chris's own laptop using his personal login. A handwriting expert also concluded that the threatening messages spray-painted in red on the walls of the home on the day of the murders matched Chris Coleman's handwriting. On the morning of May 5, 2009, Chris left his home before dawn, drove to a gym in South St. Louis, and worked out. He called Sherry's phone multiple times and got no answer. He asked neighbour Barlow to check on the house. Barlow entered and found Sherry, 31, and both boys strangled in their beds. All 3 had ligature marks around their necks consistent with a cord or rope. Forensic pathologist Dr. Michael Barden testified the deaths occurred between 11 p.m. on May 4th and 3 a.m. on May 5th, hours before Chris left for the gym.
Red spray paint covered the walls throughout the home. "I am always watching. You have paid. Punished." Detectives found a receipt for red spray paint at the house and traced it back to a hardware store purchase made by Chris. No one else's DNA was found on the victims. Security camera footage from neighbouring homes showed no one entering or leaving after Chris had gone. When police informed Chris that his family was dead, witnesses noted he shed what appeared to be forced tears and never once asked how they had been killed. Officers also noticed he was trying to conceal scratches on his arm. He was taken in for questioning. While police interviewed him in Colombia, investigators in Florida were simultaneously questioning Tara Lintz, who confirmed the affair and told police Chris had promised to serve Sherry with divorce papers on May 4th or 5th. She was wearing a promise ring from Chris when she testified at trial. At the family funeral on May 9th, Chris was texting Tara from the service. Chris was arrested and charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder. His trial began April 25, 2011, in Waterloo, Illinois, moved from Monroe County to avoid local bias. He pleaded not guilty and maintained throughout that an unknown person was behind both the threats and the murders. The jury of 10 women and 2 men deliberated for 15 hours across 2 days. At one point they appeared deadlocked, but jurors later said they found photographs on the back of a foam board in the jury room showing Chris and Tara together with dates from October 2008, proving the affair had started earlier than Coleman had admitted. On May 5, 2011, the exact 2-year anniversary of the murders, the jury found Chris Coleman guilty on all 3 counts. He bowed his head when the verdict was read and seldom looked up as jurors were individually polled. Sherry's mother trembled, then sobbed. Outside the courthouse, roughly 150 people gathered in the dark and rain and cheered as the police car carrying Coleman drove away. The jury found him eligible for the death penalty, ruling the murders were committed in a cold-blooded, premeditated manner and were brutal and heinous. Chris then waived his right to a jury sentencing and put the decision solely in the hands of Judge Milton Wharton. The judge said the horrible nature of the crimes could not be diminished, noting the victims were killed in a place of safety, their own beds. He declined to impose death and instead sentenced Chris to 3 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. Chris was initially held at Pontiac Correctional Center and later transferred to Dodge Correctional Institution in Waupun, Wisconsin for security reasons. Appeals were denied in 2014 and again in 2020. In December 2012, a judge ruled that a convicted murderer should not control the burial of his victims, and Sherry, Garrett, and Gavin's remains were exhumed from Chester and moved to Sherry's hometown near Chicago. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The final case in this video involves a man who flew to another country hours after finding his wife and baby dead, told police a story that fell apart within days, and wept openly before cameras after his conviction. Neil Entwistle. Neil Entwistle was born September 18, 1978, in Worksop near Nottingham, England. He grew up in a working-class household. His father was a coal miner, his mother a school canteen cook. He was academically gifted and attended the University of York, where he earned a master's degree in electronic engineering. It was there, in 1999, that he met Rachel Souza, an American student studying abroad from Massachusetts. They built a relationship across 2 continents. Rachel graduated from the College of the Holy Cross in Massachusetts, then returned to England to earn a teaching certificate and be close to Neil. They married on August 23, 2003, in Plymouth, England. Their daughter, Lillian Rose, was born on April 9, 2005, in Worcestershire. Rachel was 27, Neil was 26. On the surface, they appeared to be a young family with everything ahead of them. In reality, Neil was already building a hidden life held together by lies. He told Rachel and her family he earned $10,000 per month from an offshore account through a previous employer. No such account existed. He had been unemployed since September 2005. He was more than $30,000 in credit card debt. He was under investigation by eBay for multiple fraudulent transactions. He was spending money on escort services. He ran small online operations selling products of no real value.
He had posted explicit photographs of himself on adult websites looking for extramarital partners. Rachel knew none of this. She believed they were a stable family moving forward. The Entwistles moved to Massachusetts to be closer to Rachel's family. They first stayed with Rachel's mother and stepfather, Joe and Priscilla Matarazzo, in Carver, Massachusetts, before renting a 4-bedroom home of their own in Hopkinton, 26 miles west of Boston, moving in 10 days before the murders. Rachel had spoken with family on the evening of January 19, 2006. She was described as happy and well. The following morning, January 20, 2006, between approximately 11 p.m. and 6 a.m., Neil took a .22 caliber revolver belonging to his father-in-law, stored at the Matarazzo home in Carver, and shot Rachel in the head at close range while she lay in bed. Lillian was lying beside her mother. The bullet that killed Lillian passed through her abdomen and lodged above Rachel's left breast. He then covered their bodies with a blanket. He did not call emergency services. He did not call Rachel's family. He returned the gun to his father-in-law's home in Carver, then drove to Logan Airport in Boston. At approximately 5 a.m. on January 21st, he bought a one-way ticket to London, left the rented BMW in the airport parking lot, and flew home. Back in England, Neil met up with college friends, went out drinking, and watched a movie with them. He told them he had come home because he found his wife and daughter dead and was too distraught to stay. He did not call Massachusetts police. He did not contact Rachel's family. Rachel's parents and friends became alarmed when she could not be reached. Police visited the Hopkinton home on January 21st. Officers entered, but did not locate the bodies, which were obscured under a pile of bedding in the master bedroom. A second search on January 22nd found Rachel and Lillian with their arms intertwined under the covers. The bullets were so small that the wound to Rachel's head went undetected until the formal autopsy. Investigators traced the .22 revolver to Joe Matarazzo and confirmed through forensic analysis that it was the weapon used in both deaths. DNA from Neil was found on the gun. Authorities named him a person of interest and issued an international arrest warrant. On February 8, 2006, London Metropolitan Police arrested him at his parents' home in Worksop. He initially resisted extradition before waiving his right to contest it. He was returned to the United States on February 15, 2006, arraigned at Framingham District Court and held without bail. He was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, unlawful possession of a firearm, and unlawful possession of ammunition. He pleaded not guilty. His defence at trial, which began June 2, 2008 at Middlesex Superior Court in Woburn, was that Rachel had committed a murder-suicide, that she had obtained her father's gun, shot Lillian, and then shot herself. Prosecutors presented more than 40 witnesses across 12 days. Neil did not testify, and the defence called no witnesses at all. During the presentation of evidence, when a recording was played in court in which Neil spoke to a Massachusetts state trooper days after the murders and told his version of events, leaving the house for errands, returning to find them dead, observers noted that Neil appeared to cover his face and break down. Some present described it less as genuine grief and more as a reflexive attempt to shield himself, with what appeared to be a nervous laugh hidden beneath it. The jury deliberated for 2 days. On June 25, 2008, they returned guilty verdicts on both murder counts. As Judge Diane Kottmeyer read the verdict, Neil closed his eyes. His mother, standing outside the courthouse afterward, told the press she believed her son was innocent. Judge Kottmeyer sentenced Neil to 2 concurrent life terms without the possibility of parole, calling the crimes ones that defy comprehension and noting they involved the planned and deliberate murders of his wife and 9-month-old child. Rachel's family read a victim impact statement in which they said their dreams as parents and grandparents had been shattered by the shameful, selfish act of one person. Rachel and Lillian were buried together in a single coffin at Evergreen Cemetery in Kingston, Massachusetts, under the surname Souza. Lillian's birth and death certificates were later amended to read Father Unknown. Neil was subsequently transferred to Old Colony Correctional Center in Bridgewater, Massachusetts, after a white supremacist gang in his initial facility threatened his life and he was placed in protective custody. His conviction was upheld by the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court in 2012. The United States Supreme Court declined to hear his case in 2013.
He remains at Old Colony Correctional Centre, where he continues to file appeals on his own behalf. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.